Chapter 6:12. How dare you? The officials he had just called out had already been taken away by the imperial guards who had rushed in from outside. Emperor Jing looked down with a gloomy expression. In a few years, hundreds of thousands of taels of silver. I am not raising officials, but a group of vermin. This official is guilty. Please have mercy, Your Majesty. Please have mercy, Your Majesty. Please have mercy, Your Majesty. At this moment, no one had any illusions. Nearly 10 people knelt on the ground and cried out loud, tears and mucus flowing down their faces. A trace of fatigue appeared on Emperor Jing's face. He waved his hand and said, "Remove these people from their official positions. First, take them to the Supreme Court and confiscate their property. Put everything into the national treasury." Soon, those people were taken away by the imperial guards. The court officials below were all silent. They looked at the ground and did not dare to raise their heads. The highest official that had been called out by His Majesty was a fourth-rank official. A little higher would be the minister of the 6 ministries. In recent years, it was the first time that such a large number of officials had been dismissed. And looking at His Majesty's expression, this was just the beginning. Could it be that His Majesty had really made up his mind to overthrow the entire court? Yesterday, the Divination Academy sent the results of the accounts to the palace. Emperor Jing turned around and walked up. He sat back on the dragon throne and said, "I looked through the accounts all night. I am very distressed." Hearing His Majesty's voice sink, the hearts of many court officials also sank. According to the previous situation, any problematic accounts could not be hidden from the students of the Divination Academy. Didn't that mean that all the evidence of the corruption of the capital's officials was in His Majesty's hands? Thinking of this, even those officials who had a clear conscience felt a chill on their backs. As for those who felt guilty, their feet were already a little unstable. This time, could it be that they really could not escape? Boy, His Majesty trusts you the most. This time, does His Majesty really plan to catch all those people in one fell swoop? Old General Shui pushed Li Yi and asked with a frown. Just now, the old emperor had spoken so loudly that he couldn't fall asleep. Li Yi was already awake. Hearing the words, he opened his eyes and said, "You generals should know what His Majesty will do, right?" Old General Ma waved his hand and said, "His Majesty's actions these days are very different from before. Even the few of us can't figure it out. Brat, don't keep us guessing. Hurry up and tell us." Li Yi shook his head and said, "How could His Majesty allow the court to fall into chaos? Generals, don't worry." Old General Shui stared at him and asked, "Do you really know the inside story?" "Shoo." Li Yi raised a finger and whispered, "This time it's up to the generals to grasp the opportunity." A moment later, old General Shui's face lit up as he asked, "Is this true?" Li Yi retorted, "When have I ever deceived the generals?" "Good lad." Old General Shui patted him on the shoulder and rubbed his palms together. His eyes shone brightly. A faint fragrance drifted over to his side. The princess was standing beside him and asked, "Did something good happen?" During morning court sessions, the princess was the only woman who could enter this hall. Li Yi thought for a moment and felt that he should bring the princess along. Just as he was about to speak, another figure came over. The left assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Feng Yuan, was born into a poor family and failed in the imperial examinations. It was I who made an exception and recruited him. In the past 15 years he has been promoted single-handedly. The Ministry of Revenue is in charge of money and rations. Do you know how much he has embezzled? 150,000 taels. A whole 150,000 taels. Do you know that for the sake of 50,000 taels of military expenditure, the Minister of War and the Minister of Revenue almost got into a fight in front of me? That's not even enough for Feng Yuan to embezzle for a year. You may not know the director of the inspection branch, Chening, but we remember it very clearly. In the 8th year of Yuanhe, he became a jinshi. In the 10th year of Yuanhe, we promoted him to be the director of the inspection branch. 80,000 taels in 3 years. Jing Emperor's voice gradually turned from grief and indignation to pain. Some of the officials below were pale and trembling, while others showed shame on their faces. All of you here are not without problems. You are not much better than the people we have just captured. Touch your conscience. Do you still have a conscience? After a moment, Jing Emperor seemed to be tired from speaking. He sat back on the throne in a somewhat dispirited manner and said, "We have finished speaking. It's your turn to speak." Most of the officials still had their heads bowed and the entire hall was silent. At this time, whoever spoke first would be the first to face the emperor's anger. This official has something to say. Amidst the silence, an unhurried voice came from behind a pillar. Looking at the young man who walked out from behind the pillar, everyone's faces showed surprise and confusion. County Uncle Li. It was actually County Uncle Li. The investigation of the accounts was done by a student of the School of Mathematics. As the dean of the School of Mathematics and the person with the most royal favor in the court, he could have stayed out of it, but he stood up at this time. What did he want? Didn't he know that His Majesty was angry and whoever stood up would be unlucky? In the crowd, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Appointments, Li Mingzi, raised his head and showed a worried expression. The Minister of War, Yan Bing, frowned slightly. The capital governor, Dong Wenyun, looked at him in surprise. There were also a few people in the corner who looked at him with gloating eyes. "Speak." Jing Emperor glanced down and said lightly, "Reporting to your Majesty." Li raised his head and said, "The School of Mathematics has been open for half a month. In order to create a good learning environment for the students, I want to dig an inner lake in the School of Mathematics. However, the school's budget is insufficient, so I want to apply for a grant from your Majesty." Before he finished speaking, many people in the hall were stunned. Was he talking about digging a lake? His Majesty was talking about corruption. What did it have to do with digging a lake? What did digging a lake have to do with the study of the School of Mathematics? Did County Uncle Li really think that he could be so presumptuous in the court just because he was valued by His Majesty? Without waiting for them to react, another figure walked out. Old General Shui said in a rough voice, "If I may be so bold, I would like to ask your Majesty to allocate 100,000 taels of silver to purchase a new batch of military equipment for the frontline soldiers." Li glanced at General Shui. He asked for 100,000 taels. Old Ginger was spicier and his heart was more ruthless. Before people could figure out why General Shui wanted to join in the fun, there was another voice in the hall. The eldest princess came forward and said, "I have been ordered to build a women's college. I am short of 50,000 taels." Li Xian, the son of Prince Ning and the dean of the Academy of Sciences, stepped forward and said, "The Academy of Sciences is about to open. I would like to apply for 50,000 taels of research funds from your Majesty." Crazy, they were all crazy. This was the most intuitive feeling of the courtiers. It was because the national treasury was tight that there was this investigation of accounts, and His Majesty's thunderous anger. Wasn't it courting death to say this kind of thing at this time? It was understandable that County Uncle Li was hysterical and General Shui was old and confused. But why did the eldest princess and the eldest prince come up to join in the fun? The expressions of many people in the imperial court immediately changed, and many people revealed expressions of schadenfreude. The next moment, Emperor Jing stood up and slowly said in front of everyone's eyes, "The new mathematics is very important to our Jing kingdom. The soldiers are fighting at the front line, and the ordnance is indispensable. The establishment of a women's college is also a matter for women. The research of the Academy of Sciences is beneficial to the country, but the national treasury is tight, and the money needs to be used in the most important places." Emperor Jing thought for a moment and said, "The national treasury can't be used arbitrarily. How about this? I will take out 10,000 taels from the inner mansion. As for how to distribute it, you can discuss it yourself." General Shui quickly said, "Your Majesty, you must not. The inner mansion is responsible for the expenses of the palace. You must not mix it with these." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "It doesn't matter. In the future, the standards of the banquets in the palace will be reduced, and I will save some money from other places." All the courtiers in the hall were stunned. His Majesty did not blame him at all, and smoothly took over the topic. Compared to these things, the matter of accounts that almost caused the court to collapse seemed to be more important, right? Among the many courtiers, a middle-aged official suddenly came to his senses. The next moment, his breathing became a little rapid, and his face became flushed. He took a deep breath and took a big step forward. He said righteously, "Your Majesty, the inner mansion is responsible for the expenses of the palace. It has already been carefully planned, and the expenditure must not be reduced. As a courtier, I should share your Majesty's worries. I am willing to donate 20,000 taels for the soldiers of our Jing kingdom." Many officials in the court were stunned for a moment. After looking at each other, they finally seemed to realize something. Immediately, many people's faces became excited. Chapter 6:13. At this time, if there were still people who did not understand the purpose of County Uncle Lee's appearance, they were not qualified to stand in today's court. Of course, it was impossible for His Majesty to arrest all the corrupt officials in the court or drag them out to be beheaded. Not only would the court collapse, but the entire official system of the Jing kingdom would also collapse. However, corruption was real. His Majesty could not pretend that he did not see it. If he downplayed it, this phenomenon would become more serious in the future. His Majesty needed a way out, and some officials in the court also needed a way out, or a chance to atone for their crimes. Now this opportunity had appeared. After an official from the Ministry of Revenue walked out, another official stood up and said with a serious face, "Your Majesty, the students of the Mathematics College are the future pillars of the court. I am willing to donate 5,000 taels to the Mathematics College." As soon as he finished speaking, another official followed. "I am willing to donate 8,000 taels to the Women's College. I am willing to donate 10,000 taels to the Academy of Sciences. Your Majesty has worked hard for the country, and did not hesitate to reduce the expenditure of the inner residents. I am deeply ashamed and am willing to donate half of my family property." All the officials in the court had never been so patriotic and so loyal to the emperor. For the sake of sharing the emperor's worries, they would easily donate thousands of taels. In the future, it would definitely be a heavy stroke in the history books. During the reign of Jing He, the emperor was benevolent and reduced the taxes of many affected states, causing the national treasury to be empty. In the second month of the third year of Jing He, the officials were generous and donated nearly 1,000,000 taels of silver in one day. Some even donated half of their family property. They were the role models among the officials and were used by many emperors in the later generations to spur the officials. In the Golden Hall, Emperor Jing sat steadily on the dragon throne. The expression on his face was much more relaxed than before. No one knew when a table had been moved to the front. Deputy Minister Ma of the Imperial Censor sat there and took notes. The officials lined up one by one and fought to be the first to donate their family property. For them, this was not giving away their wealth, but fighting for their lives. All the officials present had already left a criminal record with His Majesty. His Majesty did not seem to want to pursue the matter, but under such circumstances, if anyone pretended to be stupid, their ending would not be much better than those who had been dragged out. Some officials didn't even know how much they had embezzled. At this moment, they had to make a rough estimate. They could only give more, not less. If they didn't have enough money, they had to sell everything they had and scrape together the money. If His Majesty found that the amount was not right after the comparison, he might use their official positions or their heads to make up the number. If they really couldn't come up with the money, they could only donate more than half of their family's wealth and use their sincerity to influence Her Majesty. Ma Zhongqing sat upright in front of the table, his hand writing in a very upright manner. He raised his head to look at the official who was walking over and smiled. "Lord Su, tens of thousands of taels?" 20,000. Lord Zhou. 10,000. Wei. 5,000. Kid, tell me honestly, did you come up with this idea? Old General Shui stood behind the pillar and asked Li Yi. "Old Shui, you're wrong. This kind of thing isn't something a kid can participate in." Li Yi waved his hand and shook his head. Old General Shui's face was full of disbelief. If this kid didn't mess up with Her Majesty, if this kid didn't collude with Her Majesty, why would he remind them to seize the opportunity? Li Xian was about to walk over when he was pulled back by Li Yi. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "What are you going to do?" "Donate money." Li Xian's face was full of doubt as he asked, "So many people have already donated. Aren't you going to donate some?" Old General Shui shook his head. Emingzu looked at him but didn't say anything. Li Yi sighed and waved his hand, saying, "Go, go." Seeing his expression, Li Xian immediately stood still and said, "That's not right. Is there something I didn't think of?" Li Yi pointed at the dozens of officials who were chatting at the side and asked, "Why aren't they donating?" He was really starting to suspect if this guy's brain was really lacking in sensitivity to politics. In this aspect, even Her Royal Highness, as a woman, was better than him. After a moment, Li Xian finally came to a realization. Brilliant, really brilliant. Which immoral guy came up with this idea? If those corrupt officials knew about it, wouldn't they hate him to death? Thank you, County Uncle Li. When an unfamiliar official walked over, he stopped by Li Yi's side for a moment, cupped his hands, and said in a low voice. Under Li Xian's astonished gaze, another person walked over and said in a low voice, "I will remember Lord Li's kindness. Let me give you a suggestion." After dealing with a few people, Li Yi turned back to look at Li Xian and said, "When you go back, eat more walnuts. Remember not to use the door clip." Her Royal Highness walked over and frowned. "I didn't expect there to be so many vermin in the imperial court. If the 5th and 6th rank officials are already like this, won't they be even more daring if they go higher up?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "Petty officials are greedy. The higher you go, the less common this phenomenon is. The higher one's official rank was, the more importance they would place on their reputation. Their every move would be watched by countless people. Moreover, to them a few thousand or 10,000 taels of silver was disdainful. At that level, which official didn't have a huge family or influence behind them? Only an idiot would delay their career for the sake of money. The purge in the imperial court this time was mostly aimed at middle-level officials. Those above the 3rd rank were not involved. On one hand, these officials couldn't be easily touched. On the other hand, Li Yi had checked the accounts. Except for a few, the rest were relatively minor and harmless. After all, the annual tax revenue of the Jing Kingdom didn't exceed 10 million taels of silver. The old emperor wasn't blind. It was impossible for him not to notice that too much money disappeared at once. Of course, this was the capital, where the emperor lived. The situation outside the capital was definitely more serious than here. The old emperor was really obsessed with money. The morning court session lasted for a long time. The morning court session still exceeded everyone's expectations. There was thunder, but it didn't last long. More of it was a light breeze and drizzle. The difference was that if someone didn't know what was good for them, the drizzle might be followed by thunder. They knew how much they had taken. This time, His Majesty was merciful and only punished a few typical people. As for the others, if they took the initiative to donate money, they wouldn't be held accountable. But it was only this time. Even if they avoided this time, they might not be able to avoid the next time. From now on, some people in the imperial court would have to be careful. If they went out of line again, they would have to settle old and new accounts at the same time. Of course, in the eyes of those officials who weren't affected, His Majesty's move was extremely brilliant. After today, the situation in the imperial court would change greatly. All the forces would be reshuffled, especially the King of Shu, who would suffer heavy losses. Among them, the Qin family, the Chen family, the Cui family and a few other big families would suffer heavy losses, but it wouldn't shake their foundation. However, for those officials who didn't have a solid foundation, His Majesty had a handle on them. They could only pray for themselves in the future. It could be foreseen that His Majesty's control over the entire imperial court would reach its peak in the future. It would even reach a peak that none of the previous emperors of the Jing Kingdom had reached. Your Majesty, about the matter of the cultivation lake in the academy. In the rear hall, Li Yi looked at Emperor Jing and asked tentatively. 30,000 taels. Emperor Jing seemed to be in a good mood. He waved his hand and said, "I will only give you 30,000 taels. You can figure out the rest yourself." After a moment of shock, Li Yi immediately cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will leave first." Looking at his decisive action, Emperor Jing's expression froze and he asked, "How much money did you originally want from me?" Li Yi had already stepped out of the hall. He turned his head and said, "Your Majesty, I had originally planned to ask for 50,000 taels of silver, but the national treasury is tight. I will think of a way to get the remaining 20,000 taels of silver. Should I have said 10,000 taels just now? After Li Yi's figure disappeared, Emperor Jing touched his chin and said regretfully. Changde thought for a moment and said, judging from County Uncle Li's decisiveness just now, I'm afraid 5,000 taels is also possible. Chapter 6:14. Husband, I don't think there are any holidays these days, right? Looking at the gifts that almost filled the entire room, Ruri asked in surprise after thinking for a bit. This was not the most surprising part. Usually, her family did not have much contact with the officials and nobles in the capital. Even if there were holidays, it was impossible for her to receive so many gifts. The people who gave the gifts were all officials in the capital. Some of them were servants from their families, while others came personally. Their attitudes were very polite. Even when the housekeeper invited them into the manor for a cup of tea, they were rejected. They put down the gifts and left. It was extremely strange. Li Yi casually waved his hand and said, My wife, you don't have to worry about these things. In any case, if someone gives you gifts these days, just accept them. Don't worry. This time he accepted the gifts with peace of mind. He did not feel any psychological pressure at all. The officials in the capital were still polite and gave expensive gifts. Based on the situation, they should have kept some of the money they had donated in court that day. If they knew that the old emperor had only planned to deal with a few greedy people, and had decided to burn the accounts for the stability of the court, and let the others go, would he take back these gifts? However, these gifts should still be accepted. After all, he had spent a lot of effort to persuade the old emperor to change his mind. Furthermore, he did not gain much from it, so why bother? After dealing with a few corrupt officials, the storm in court finally calmed down. After that, Li Yi did not go to court again. However, he heard that there had been a lot of personnel changes in court these days. Officials were promoted and demoted. Departments like the Ministry of Revenue had been purged from head to toe. Everyone chose to remain silent about the old emperor's big moves. The storm from the last corruption case had just passed and had not completely subsided. At this time, no one dared to speak too much and remind the emperor of some bad things and bring up old matters. Most of the officials in court would not let them go. As expected, the person who made money the easiest in the world was the emperor. With just a few words, he had immediately earned nearly 1,000,000 liang of silver. He had also established his prestige in court, intimidated a large number of people, recruited a large number of people, and taken the opportunity to purge a large number of people. He had killed several birds with one stone. This was a very good deal. Earning money was easy, but getting money from him was harder than ascending to the heavens. However, 30,000 taels of silver was more than enough to repair a lake. In this day and age, labor was not worth much, not to mention that the silver had to be kept for more important things. In the future, it could be used as research funds and the like. How could it be spent on such a small matter as repairing a lake? The timetable of the academy had changed these days. From morning to night, the sequence was digging the lake, going to class, digging the lake, and resting. Digging a lake wasn't just about digging a lake. How deep to dig it, how to design the waterways, all of these had to be carefully calculated. If any of these were not done well, the course would fail. Yes, digging a lake was also a subject. This course was a compulsory course for all students. Regardless of whether they were from an aristocratic family or a poor family, they had to obtain 2 innovation credits. Otherwise, even if they obtained full credits, they still wouldn't be able to graduate. It was said that the purpose of this course was to strengthen the physique of the students of the mathematics department, to train their ability to solve practical problems, to work together, to dig a lake, and so on. In any case, this was the dean's good intentions. The poor students wouldn't doubt it. And it was useless for the children of aristocratic families to doubt it. If they didn't want to dig, they could just leave. The mathematics department had no shortage of people. No one dared to disobey or look down on this young dean, because no one knew when he would recommend you for an internship. Everyone knew how dangerous it was to go out for an internship. Li Jianren lost a leg, and it was said that he almost lost his life. Chun Lisan was poisoned, and his life was hanging by a thread. He was only saved by 2 liters of feces. To him, living was probably worse than death. The others didn't end up well either. Some were sick, some were injured, and what was even more unacceptable was that they had put in so much effort. But in the end, they were still expelled from the mathematics department by Her Majesty. They would never be hired by the imperial court again. They could only be hedonistic sons for the rest of their lives, and their bright and limitless futures were ruined. Therefore, these hedonistic sons who had never suffered much in their lives could only put down their pride and dignity, dig the lake with the poor students, eat from the same pot, and sleep in the same room. As the dean of the mathematics department, Li Yi, of course, wasn't in the mathematics department. Li Han would help him supervise the digging of the lake and the classes. He was very active in these things because if he worked hard he would have enough holidays and enough guards. He could play wherever he wanted. For Li Han, who grew up in the palace, the outside world was infinitely attractive. These days Li Yi was busy. Rui wasn't in a good mood, so he could only find ways to make her happy. He even went to the palace to learn a few new dishes, and gave her the first string of colorful glass beads he produced. Xiaohuan and Mississippi. Lu were jealous, but he didn't give it to her for a few days. Feng walked in from the outside mysteriously. He put something covered with a red cloth on the table and asked in a low voice, "Young master, how much is this thing worth?" He lifted the red cloth, and a crystal-clear guanyin statue about a foot tall appeared in front of Li Yi. The guanyin statue was made vividly. Its facial features were clear, and its expression was very vivid. Under the sunlight, it gave people a strong visual impact. Li Yi didn't understand the market, but the more transparent something was, the more precious it was in this world. This guanyin statue for the Buddhist believers was definitely something worth fighting over. He originally planned to give it to the madam, and didn't consider the price. But after careful consideration, the cost of this thing wasn't low. The equipment, materials, mental damage, and the old craftsman's labor cost would cost at least 1 tael of silver. Selling it for 5,000 taels of silver wouldn't be too much, right? Through what happened in the court a few days ago, he had a general understanding of the wealth of the officials in the capital. 5,000 taels of silver. There were many people in the capital who could afford it. "Young master, there are a few monks outside who want to see you. Do you want to let them?" Xiaohuan walked to the door, and had just opened her mouth to speak when her gaze was attracted by the transparent guanyin statue, and couldn't move away. "Monks." A trace of doubt appeared on Li Yi's face. He said, "Let them in first." Last time, Rui said that the old monk Tan Yin had invited him to the cold mountain temple to discuss Zen, but Li Yi never went. This time, the old monk probably came looking for him. Sure enough, when a shiny head appeared in front of him, the old monk Tan Yin's face also appeared. "Ba, young benefactor Li, long time no see." The old monk Tan Yin's smile was still so kind as he said a Buddhist greeting. "Master, long time no see." Li Yi thought to himself that whatever he needed would come. He could also ask the old monk how much this guanyin statue was worth. That way he would have a reference price in his mind. "Master, come quickly. Help me see how much this guanyin statue is worth." The smile on Li Yi's face was very warm. He casually ordered the little servant girl, "Xiaohuan, Master Tan Yin is an honored guest. Quickly go tell the kitchen to prepare a table of good wine and good dishes. 8 meat and 8 vegetables. Remember to cut 2 tails of pig's ears with minced garlic." Chapter 6:15. Monks abstain from eating meat. "Young benefactor Li, please don't joke around. There's no need for a banquet." The old monk, Tan Yin, still had a faint smile on his face as he said, "Young benefactor just said something about guanyin." At some point, Master Tan Yin's voice suddenly stopped as he stared at the guanyin statue on the table. The young monks behind him also widened their eyes. The next moment, a pious look appeared on their faces. Feng took a step forward with some vigilance. If these monks dared to rob him, he would not be polite. "Master, master." Seeing that the old monk had stopped talking, Li stretched out his hand and waved it gently in front of his eyes. Master Tan Yin's body shook, and then a look of guilt immediately appeared on his face. He said, Ba, I lost my composure for a moment. I hope young benefactor Li won't blame me." It's okay, it's okay. Li Yi smiled and waved his hand, saying, Master, how much do you think this Guanyin statue is worth? Ba. The old monk chanted the name of Buddha again and said, This is the sitting statue of Guanyin Bodhisattva. How can it be measured by these things in the secular world? Master, you mean? Li Yi looked at him and asked with some uncertainty, Is this a priceless treasure? Priceless. The old monk nodded and said, Glaze is a priceless treasure. Such a precious glazed statue of Bodhisattva can't be measured by money. It should be worshipped by believers in the temple. I wonder if young benefactor Li can give this glazed Bodhisattva statue to the Cold Mountain Temple? Li Yi's expression froze as he looked at the old monk Tan Yin in disbelief. He had originally thought that he himself was shameless enough, unconventional enough. He had not expected that this Master Sandalwood Yin would be even more shameless, unconventional than him. He had already said that it was a priceless treasure. How could he have the cheek to say that he would give it to the Cold Mountain Temple? Hearing this, Fang's face immediately fell and he took a step forward. Although this old monk didn't look like someone to be trifled with, if he wanted to snatch this thing away, he would definitely let him have a taste of his fist. Master, you must be joking. Li Yi smiled and said, We spent a lot of effort to get this glazed statue of Buddha. It's worth a lot, and we're planning to sell it to the Fahua Temple. Master Tan Yin's expression changed and he immediately asked, I wonder how much young benefactor Li plans to sell this glazed Buddha statue for. 5,000 taels? Li asked tentatively. How much is Fahua Temple offering you? Our Cold Mountain Temple will pay double. Before Master Tan Yin could speak, a young monk behind him immediately stepped forward and said anxiously, Fei Ming, step down. Master Sandalwood said softly, and the young monk immediately retreated. Although the young monk retreated, there was an anxious look on his face. Cold Mountain Temple and Fahua Temple were the two most famous temples near the capital. Both of them had a large number of believers. If Fahua Temple got their hands on this precious glazed statue of Goddess of Mercy, they would definitely treat it like a treasure and advertise it to attract more believers. In this way, wouldn't the Cold Mountain Temple soon lose out to them? Li glanced at the young monk. 5,000 taels in double. Wouldn't that be 10,000 taels in total? This young monk could make the decision for such a large amount. Monks were actually so rich. It seemed that the old emperor's anti-corruption campaign this time had targeted the wrong target. I was being rude just now. Master Tan Yin bowed to Li Yi and said, It's just that this glazed Buddha statue is very important to the Cold Mountain Temple. I hope that young benefactor Li can make it convenient for us. As for the price, please rest assured that the Cold Mountain Temple will definitely not let you suffer a loss. Well said, well said. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Master and I are friends. If I really want to sell this Buddha statue, of course, I will consider the Cold Mountain Temple first. The old monk chanted again. Ba. In that case, I will thank young benefactor Li in advance. An hour later. Thank you, young benefactor Li. I will take my leave now. Young benefactor Li, you don't have to see me off anymore. Goodbye, master. Li Yi smiled and saw Master Tan Yin and the few young monks out of the door. One of the young monks reminded the young monk, Senior brother, you have to hold on tight. Don't fall. If you break it, it will be a great sin. Don't worry. The young monk hugged the things in the bag tightly. This was a great opportunity for the Cold Mountain Temple to flourish, attract believers, and surpass Fahua Temple in one fell swoop. How could he be careless? I've forgotten that the reason I'm looking for young benefactor Li this time is to ask him to translate a scripture. The old monk Tan Yin sighed and said unhurriedly, although the matter of the scripture was temporarily put on hold, the harvest was far better than the scripture. Master, are you leaving just like that? A soft voice came from beside him. Master Tan Yin turned his head and nodded slightly. Madam Li. After a few simple greetings, Master Tan Yin and the few monks turned and left. However, after taking 2 steps, he looked back with a meaningful look in his eyes. Master, what's wrong? The young monk asked in confusion. Master Tan Yin shook his head and said, Nothing, let's go. Oh my God. After watching Master Tan Yin and the few monks leave, Fang sat down on a chair and picked up the teacup with trembling hands. 8,000 taels, a full 8,000 taels. The thing made from the pile of sand was sold for 8,000 taels in the end. Moreover, according to the reaction of the monks, this price could be increased. When he walked out of the courtyard and looked at the pile of sand not far away, he instantly felt that he was the richest person in the world. Inside the house, Li paced in the hall. A glass guanyin statue was sold for 8,000 taels. Anyway, the monk was rich. If he made another Buddha statue and told Fahua Temple that Cold Mountain Temple bought a glass guanyin statue from him for 20,000 taels, would Fahua Temple buy the Buddha statue for 30,000 taels? If he told Cold Mountain Temple that Fahua Temple spent 50,000 taels to buy a taller and larger glass Buddha statue, would Cold Mountain Temple spend another 100,000 taels to buy an upgraded guanyin statue? If he told Fahua Temple that Cold Mountain Temple spent 150,000 taels, forget it, he couldn't do that. This was too heartless. There would be retribution if he cheated the monks like this. Even if he wanted to cheat them, he couldn't just cheat Cold Mountain Temple and Fahua Temple. Jinshan Temple, Nanhua Temple, Donghua Temple, Beihua Temple, Shihua Temple. He could cheat them one by one. After he cheated the Jing Kingdom, he could go to the Qi Kingdom. After he cheated the Qi Kingdom, he could go to the Zhao Kingdom. He could cheat all the monks in the world. How much would that cost? After he cheated the monks, he could also cheat the Taoist priests and build a pile of glass statues of Taishang Laozi. He could visit the Jing Kingdom, the Qi Kingdom, the Zhao Kingdom. He was rich, he was rich. What was the Wang family? What was the Ma family? From now on, the Li family would be the richest in the world. Chapter 616. Son-in-law, is the soup ready? Xiao Huan had just poked her head in from outside the kitchen when she was pushed back by Li Yi. I still need another 15 minutes. I'll call you when it's ready. Rui liked the sweet and sour soup from the dining hall very much. She had specially learned it last time. And now it was an indispensable dish on the family's dining table every day. The maidservant stood guard outside the door while the son-in-law brewed soup for the young miss. She actually wanted to go in and help, but the son-in-law wouldn't let her. Not even when the second young miss wanted to sneak a sip. The son-in-law was treating the young miss better and better these days. However, the son-in-law was also very good to Xiao Huan and the second young miss. The maidservant raised her wrist and looked at the colorful bracelet on it. Every time the maidservants in the residence saw it, their eyes would almost pop out. Perhaps it was because he had helped the old emperor earn a lot of money last time. But he didn't say anything about the management of the academy at home these days. In these few days, Li Yi had placed most of his energy on the glass, on the colored glass. Because the sand contained metal elements, the colored glass that was produced was mostly colored. Transparent glass was more difficult to produce, and a large part of it depended on luck. Thus, the colorless glazed guanyin statue sold to the old monk Tan for 8,000 taels was not expensive at all. If not for his friendship with the old monk and sold to the Fahua Temple, they wouldn't even be able to touch it for less than 20,000 taels. He had originally considered selling 2 statues to the Fahua Temple at a high price, but after some thought, he decided against it. That would be a little too unethical. In 2 years, he wouldn't even be able to be friends with them. Although what happened here 2 years later wouldn't affect him much, the thought of being hated by all the monks and Taoists in the world and being cursed all day long made him shudder. This business was too risky. His family was a small temple and couldn't withstand such a big storm. Thus, he had to rope in at least 2 reliable partners. The Wang family was one, but it wasn't too safe. The safest way was to rope in the old emperor, who only cared about money. He had been jealous of the silver of the officials and nobles in the capital for a long time. And he wasn't afraid of offending anyone. He was definitely a good partner to work with. Although this way, they would earn a lot less money in the future, they wouldn't have to be scolded, and they wouldn't have to bear grudges. The risk was almost zero, and it was still very worth it. This matter could not be rushed. He had to plan step by step. While benefiting the nobility in the capital, he had to strive to maximize the benefits, and at the same time, mess with the Cui family. Fong walked to the door and said, "Son-in-law, that Wang guy is here again." Brotherly. Wang Yong walked in from outside, cupped his hands and greeted with a smile. "Brother Wang, There's no need to stand on ceremony. Please sit. Just as he was thinking about the Wang clan, Wang Yong came over. After Xiao Huan served tea, the two did not exchange many words before Wang Yong went straight to the point. Wang Yong raised his head and said, "This time, my father asked me to come over. He wants to ask about the big business that Brother Li mentioned last time." Although the two of them had reached an agreement on that big business last time, Wang Yong still didn't know what that big business was until now. It was only because of his trust in County Uncle Li's ability and the Wang clan's principle of being greedy for money that he didn't ask. Li smiled and said, "Even if Brother Wang didn't ask, I would still tell you today. Brother Wang, please wait for a moment, I will be back soon." "Feng, come with me for a moment." Li walked out of the door and said to Feng, who was leaning against the wall to eavesdrop. Wang Yong picked up the teacup and took a sip. There was a trace of doubt on his face, but it quickly disappeared. Not long after, he saw County Uncle Li and the big man come in with a few boxes of different sizes. Old Feng walked out and closed the door behind him. "Brother Li, this is?" Li handed over a square box and said, "Brother Wang, open it and you will know." Wang Yong took the box and was surprised to find that it was a bit heavy. After opening the lid, his face was stunned for a moment, and then immediately widened. There was a fist-sized ball-shaped object in the box. It was colorful, and as it shook slightly, it gave off a brilliant glow. As the eldest son of the Wang clan, he had seen countless treasures, so he recognized what it was with a single glance. Colored glass. He raised his head to look at Li Yi and asked in disbelief. Colored glaze is a natural object, the head of the 5 famous artifacts and one of the 7 treasures of Buddhism. It is rarely seen. Brother Li, where did you get this colored glaze? Li Yi didn't answer and asked with a smile. In Brother Wang's opinion, how much is this colored glass ball worth? Wang Yong shook his head and said, "Colored glass is extremely rare, and such a regular shape is even rarer. Once it is out in the market, I am afraid that countless people will fight for it, especially the Buddhists, who will certainly not let it go. Its value is really hard to estimate. However, if it is handed over to the Wang clan, we can at least sell it for this amount." Wang Yong stretched out a finger. 10,000 taels. Li Yi smiled and said, "There is no hurry. Brother Wang, look at the others first." Wang Yong nodded and closed the lid of the box. He carefully put it away and opened another box. In an instant, he was almost blinded by the colorful light that overflowed from the box. Another colored glass ball. A different colored glass ball. Wang Yong raised his head abruptly and glanced at Li Yi. He seemed to have realized something. After putting the box away, he opened the other one. This time, he could no longer suppress the shock on his face. He put down the box and reached for another. 7. The expression on Wang Yong's face was a little dazed. There were a total of 7 glass balls, 7 glass balls of different colors. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva and asked, "Brother Li, where did you get these things from?" Li looked at him and asked again, "Brother Wang, how much do you think these glass balls are worth?" Wang Yong was startled and said, "The rarer something is, the more valuable it is. Any treasure, if there are too many of them, the value will be greatly reduced. If these glass balls are thrown out at once, the value will definitely be greatly affected." Li Yi smiled and took out the 8th glass ball from the box. He weighed it in his hand and said, "Then what if there are only 7 of these glass balls in this world, and you can summon the dragon god by gathering all 7 different colored glass balls?" "What?" Wang Yong was confused. "Pa." He let go of the glass ball and it fell to the ground, shattering into pieces. Wang Yong's expression changed drastically. He quickly stood up and said, "Brother Li, what are you doing?" Li looked at him and said, "Then there are only 7. Wang Yong was startled and slowly sat down. He took a deep breath and said, "Brother Li, how many more glass balls do you have?" Li smiled and said, "I accidentally dug up a glass mine. I can have as much as you want." Wang Yong was startled again. After a moment he raised his head and said, "Brother Li, you should know that if we sell off a large amount at once, the glass will lose its original value. Moreover, if there are more glass balls in the future, we will immediately become the target of public criticism." "Not us." Li shook his head and said, "It's you." He looked at Wang Yong and said, "The Li family will not be involved in this matter." The glass balls were brought in by a wealthy merchant from another country. The Wang family bought them at a high price and sold them for charity in the capital. 40% of the proceeds will be donated to the National Treasury for disaster relief. His Majesty will also be involved in this matter? Wang Yong asked with a serious expression. Li thought about it and nodded. How much will the Wang family take? He asked again. 20%, Li said straightforwardly. Chapter 617. 20%? Wang Yong's expression changed. After thinking for a long time he said, "Brotherly, I'm really sorry. I can't make the decision. I need to go back and ask my father." "There's no hurry." Li waved his hand and said, "This is a serious matter. I'll go back now." Wang Yong stood up and walked 2 steps before coming back. He pointed at the boxes on the table and asked, "Can I finish looking at these?" "Brother Wang, feel free." Wang Yong nodded. His face was filled with excitement. He opened another box, and his face immediately glowed. Then the second, the third. After a while, he turned around and pointed at the pile of boxes. He asked Li, "These glass chopsticks, glass cups, glass jewelry?" Li nodded. "They were all dug out from the mine." "This too." Wang Yong pointed at the last brocade box. There was a 2-foot-tall statue of a woman in it. It was vivid and lifelike. "This too." Li nodded again. "It's so strange. Why is there everything in this glass mine? I'll take my leave." Wang Yong looked excited. After cupping his fist at Li, he did not say anything and left in a hurry. Li stood up from the chair and looked at the pile of glass shards on the floor. The corner of his mouth twitched, and an extremely painful expression appeared on his face. 10,000 taels. Impulsive. Fong, hurry up and take these shards back. You can still use them if you burn them. Hearing the commotion, Lao Fong strode into the room. Not long after, a miserable howl came from inside the room. Which D***MN bastard did this? Was it that Wang guy? I knew he wasn't a good person. I'm going to stop him and bring him back to compensate me. Young master, don't stop me. Forget it. Isn't it just a glass ball? It's fine if it's broken. He's a guest. This is not good. It'll make us look petty. It's worth a lot of money. Forget it. Money comes second. Friendship comes first. Don't let me see him again." Fong wrapped the shards in his coat and walked out of the room swearing. Inside the room, Li shook his head and sighed. Wang Yong, why is he so careless? He walked out of the room and shouted in a certain direction. Xiao Huan. Ah. After a while, a servant girl ran out in a hurry. Have them prepare the carriage. After saying this, Li walked back into the room and carried the largest brocade box into the back hall. Father, we can't do this business. In a deep manor somewhere in the capital, a young man looked at a middle-aged man wearing a Confucian robe and said urgently, "If it's like this, when glazed ware becomes common in the future, our Wang family will become the enemy of all the nobles in the capital." The middle-aged man did not answer directly. Instead, he looked at the slightly older young man and asked, "Yonger, what do you think of this matter?" "Father, I have a different opinion on this matter." Wang Yong thought for a bit and said, "On the way back, I kept thinking about this matter. The emperor has just checked the accounts of the Jingdo officials. Any corrupt person has long donated their dirty silver to the national treasury. This matter has just passed. I'm afraid that not many people in court will have the courage to buy this glassware. However, those great clans and nobles will definitely not let go of such an opportunity." Wang Yong continued, "The internal strife between the major clans is like fire and water. We only need to inform a small number of families, and the Wang family's vassal families. What's there to fear even if we offend the rest? Our Wang family can get 20% of the profit without any investment. What's more, the royal family will also participate in this. On the one hand, we can be firmly tied to County Early. On the other hand, we can work for the royal family. The advantages outweigh the disadvantages. Therefore, I think this is feasible." Haha. The middle-aged man in scholarly robes smiled and patted the shoulder of the young man who spoke first. Do you still remember what the most important thing to remember as a descendant of the Wang family is? Make money. The young man immediately nodded. Remember, as long as the Wang family doesn't rebel, we will always have a foothold in the Jing kingdom. The middle-aged man nodded and changed his tone. What's more, we must be on good terms with that county early. Yong, or I'll leave this matter to you. I understand, Wang Yong said with a solemn expression. All right, don't just wait here. Go do your own things. Wait for me here in 4 hours. Li Yi came down from the carriage with a long brocade box in his arms. He waved to the people around the carriage and turned to walk toward the palace gate. He ran into Chang walking out of the palace gate. Changde was startled to see him and said, "The emperor wants to see you. Can you wait a bit?" Li Yi gestured at the box in his hand and said, "I have to send this to the princess." Changde shook his head and said, "Go see the emperor first. It won't be too late to see the princess after that." "Let's go." Li Yi waved his hand. It just so happened that he had something to discuss with the old emperor. It didn't matter who he saw first or later. In the imperial garden, Emperor Jing watched Master Tan Yin's hand withdraw from his wrist and asked, "How is it?" Master Tan Yin pondered for a moment and said, "Your Majesty, you should try to avoid overwork in the future. Otherwise, the dragon's body won't be optimistic." Emperor Jing was silent for a moment and said, 3 years. I only need 3 years. Can't you do it with your medical skills? Ba. No matter how good your medical skills are, you are still immortal. There is nothing you can do. Master Tan Yin chanted the name of Buddha and said, "You can only gain by giving up. If your Majesty can let it go, perhaps you can have 3 years. If I let it go, what's the use of these 3 years?" Emperor Jing smiled and said, "Thank you for your hard work, Master. I'll take my leave." Master Tan Yin stood up from the stone bench, retreated to the stone pavilion, and turned to leave. Emperor Jing looked into the distance absent-mindedly, and his face showed a deep sense of dejection. The two walked on the road in silence. At a certain moment, Changde suddenly asked curiously, "Why didn't Uncle Li ask me why His Majesty summoned you today? If I asked you, would you tell me?" Li glanced at him. How could a psychopath have the face to ask him? Every time he pretended to be confused. Was he addicted to pretending now? When he turned his head, he was a little surprised to see a figure. Li walked over and said, "Master Tan Yin, what a coincidence. I didn't expect to meet you here." The glazed statue of Guanyin that was taken away at noon was sent down in the afternoon. Although half of it was taken by Mississippi Lu on the spot to recruit people, it did not affect Li Yi's good impression of the monk. Ba. This old monk and young benefactor Li are fated. No matter when, Master Tan Yin always had a faint smile on his face. After that, he looked at Li Yi again and asked, "May I know?" Seeing that Master Tan Yin seemed to want to ask something, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, Master. If there are other Buddha statues and Guanyin statues, I will look for you. I won't sell them to Fahua Temple." Li Yi decided not to cheat the monk. When there was remaining glass, he would give them a palm-sized set of 18 arhats. They were all old friends. He had to make them feel that the 8,000 taels of silver was worth it. "This is not what I mean." Master Tan Yin shook his head and said, "Then what did you want to say just now?" Li looked at him with some doubts. Master Tan Yin thought for a moment and finally shook his head. He said, "Young benefactor Li, you should go quickly. Don't let His Majesty wait too long. I will leave now." After saying that, he walked straight ahead. "This monk is strange." Li shook his head and said inexplicably, "He is a monk, so he is naturally strange." An unfamiliar voice came from the side. Li turned around and saw a Taoist priest in black walking over from behind. He said with a smile, "Greetings, County Uncle Li, Chief Steward Chang." Surnamed Yuan, "What are you doing here?" Changde frowned and said with some dissatisfaction. Just now, he did not show such an expression to Master Tan Yin, which meant that compared to the monk, Chang obviously disliked the Taoist priest more. Li had already seen the pavilion in front of him. He ignored the two people and walked forward. He let the guard under the pavilion hold the box in his hand and told him to be careful. Before he walked up, Emperor Jing's voice came. "Don't hide it." What good thing did you bring for me this time? Just bring it out. Chapter 6:18. Your Majesty, this is not for you. Li stood under the pavilion and explained. Even the world belongs to me. What else doesn't belong to me? The old emperor waved his hand and said, Don't dawdle like a woman. Bring it up quickly. It was a birthday gift for the princess. If the old emperor had the face to blacken this, he would have nothing to say. Li Yi took the brocade box from the guard's hand, walked to the pavilion, and put it on the table in the middle. Jing Emperor looked curious and said, Open it for me to see. Your Majesty, let's forget it. Li Yi looked at the bow tied with colorful ribbons at the top and hesitated. This is a gift for the Princess Royal. It took me a lot of effort to wrap it like this. Jing Emperor picked up the teacup and waved his hand impatiently. Open it when I tell you to. Just wrap it up later. Li Yi had no choice but to untie the ribbon and put it aside. He said, I will open it. Your Majesty, you have to be mentally prepared. Why do you talk so much nonsense today? Jing Emperor took a sip of tea and glanced at him. Li Yi moved the box a little further away and opened the lid. At the moment when Jing Emperor spat out a mouthful of tea, he quickly closed the lid and turned around with the brocade box in his arms. The old emperor was still blinded by the thing in the box. Fortunately, he moved fast enough. The price of the glazed statue that had been sprayed with tea might be discounted. However, his clothes could be sold appropriately in the future. The clothes that had been sprayed with tea by the emperor had a special commemorative meaning. It was absolutely not excessive to sell it for 1,000 taels of silver. Open it, open it. Jing Emperor put down the teacup and stood up from the stone bench. His eyes were bright. Your Majesty, don't get excited. Li Yi put the box on the table and opened the lid again. Jing Di stood up and bent over. He saw that there was a glass statue of a woman about 2 feet tall in the box. The woman was dressed in a palace dress and looked very lifelike. Even her expression was very vivid. Most of the statue was transparent, and the patterns on the dress were clearly visible. It was colorful, and under the sunlight, there seemed to be light flowing, and it was very dazzling. As an emperor, he had seen countless treasures. Although he had never seen such a large and exquisite glass statue, he quickly calmed down and asked suspiciously, Is this really a gift for Emingzu? When did you become so generous? Li Yi closed the lid and wrapped the ribbon again. He said, I have always been generous to my friends. A mere glass statue is nothing to me. Emperor Jing looked at him and asked, It is said that colored glass is a gift from the heavens. It is extremely rare even in the palace. How did you get such a large piece of colored glass and carve it into the shape of Emingzu? Li Yi put the box to one side and said, I came to the palace this time to tell His Majesty about this matter. This matter is not urgent. I have other things to ask you. Jing Di waved his hand, and a guard behind him spread a white cloth on the table. There was a grid on the cloth and it looked very familiar. What did the monk say to His Majesty? A few feet away from the pavilion, the middle-aged Taoist stood next to Changde and looked at him and asked, I just came over. Changde said lightly. He turned his head to look at the middle-aged Taoist priest and said, I don't care what Monk Tanin says to His Majesty, but his medical skills are something that even the imperial physician order is inferior to. As for you, surnamed Yuan, if you offer any pills to His Majesty again, not only will I not let you off, I will also not let your Dao sect off. Chief Steward Chang's temper is exactly the same as it was decades ago. The middle-aged Taoist was not angry at Changde's rebuke at all. He said, I apologize for what happened last time. At that time, I was traveling far away from the capital and did not know about it. If not, I would not have let the disciples of Taoism do such a thing. You don't have to apologize to me, Changde said coldly. If it was not for His Majesty's benevolence, do you think your Taoism could continue to be stable? When it comes to His Majesty's health, it seems that you, Chief Steward Chang, have a greater responsibility, right? The middle-aged Taoist looked at him and said, After all, the late emperor entrusted His Majesty to you, Chief Steward Chang. The guards under the pavilion inexplicably felt a little cold. After wrapping their clothes tightly, they looked at the pavilion again. Accompanying Li Yi to eat could be said to be experienced, but this was the first time he played with the emperor. The old emperor actually played beast chess, and the chess pieces were made of white jade. Li Yi had forced the old emperor's leopard into a desperate situation. The old emperor looked at him and said with a smile, "A momentary failure is not really a failure. Sometimes, giving up some things can often lead to greater gains." He casually moved a chess piece, and Li Yi found that his elephant had been forced into a corner. Li Yi smiled and said, "Only when you're in a desperate situation will you be able to survive. Sometimes, if you don't push yourself, you won't know how much potential you have. Your Majesty, eat this official's flying elephant." "How dare you?" A trace of anger appeared on Emperor Jing's face. "You dare to play chess with me? In that case, don't blame me for the earth-drilling mouse. Your Majesty, how about this move of jumping tiger? No matter how good you are at jumping, can you escape from my inescapable net? Come out, the universe's super-invincible celestial hound." "I lost?" "Yes, Your Majesty lost. Once the celestial hound comes out, who can compete with it?" "How did my celestial hound die just now?" "It was bitten to death by my tiger. Isn't it the universe's super-invincible celestial hound?" "Your Majesty, when you use this move, you should shout to be the celestial hound. If you don't shout, it's the Chinese countryside dog. So you're saying that I really lost? Your Majesty really lost." Emperor Jing put down the chess piece and said, "A few days ago, the academy expelled a total of 13 students, all of whom were the children of influential families. There has been a discussion in the imperial court that we cannot give excessive preferential treatment to the children of poor families. Otherwise, it will be unfair. I want to choose 10 more from the children of the aristocratic families. You should make some arrangements in advance." "Okay." Li Yi nodded. This time, the Cui and Qin families would not send their children into the fire pit. If there were any with the surname Qin or Cui, he could rope them in. After all, it was better not to have a family that did not care about the lives of their clansmen. Emperor Jing nodded slightly and said, "In the last account investigation, I did not want to disturb the foundation of the imperial court, so I did not kill the officials who voluntarily handed over the stolen money. These days, some officials in the imperial court have proposed to establish a system of atonement silver. That is, according to the seriousness of the official's crime, a certain amount of money can be used to exempt a certain amount of punishment. This can solve the problem of the state treasury being empty. What do you think?" Li Yi packed up the chess pieces and said, "Once the atonement silver is used, the Jing kingdom will not be far from being destroyed." Emperor Jing frowned and asked, "Is it that serious?" He could not tell him that in another world, the most corrupt official in history, He Shun, proposed this system. Although it made the pockets of the emperor and himself full, the country decayed a lot and accelerated the destruction of the Qing dynasty. That was how the Qing dynasty was destroyed. If the Jing kingdom dared to do this, it would be destroyed sooner or later. Emperor Jing sighed and said, "Although a large amount of money came into the state treasury a few days ago, the deficit was too big before. Moreover, we allocated 30,000 taels to the arithmetic school. We still can't make ends meet." Li Yi raised his head and looked at him. Was 30,000 taels the main point? Moreover, he had helped him save that 30,000 taels, and left it in the arithmetic school as a start-up fund for future projects. The stingy old emperor, old Shui, asked for 100,000 taels. Why did he not let go of the arithmetic school? Li Yi sighed and said, "Your Majesty does not need to worry. There is a solution to the problem of the state treasury being empty." "Really?" Emperor Jing looked up at him and asked, "You have a way to solve the problem of the state treasury being empty?" "I will not hide it from your Majesty. Today, I came to solve your Majesty's problem." Li Yi nodded. At this moment he felt like a fraud. Chapter 619. Emperor Jing's expression relaxed and he said, "Tell me, what is the solution?" "I want to do business with your Majesty." "Business?" Emperor Jing glanced at him and said lightly, "In this world, it is the first time that someone wants to do business with me." Li Yi thought that the old emperor was boasting. First time doing business with someone? Then who tempted him with the lovely Yong Ning to compete with the people of the Qi kingdom? If it wasn't for the fact that he was afraid of exposing him and causing him to lose face, which might cause the guards under the pavilion to do something unpredictable, he wouldn't have given him face today. You stink of money, and you still want to pull me in. Emperor Jing picked up the teacup again and said, "Tell me first and I will think about it. I suddenly remembered that your majesty is the ruler of a country, and you should not be involved in these things. I am still in a hurry to send gifts to the princess. I will leave." Li Yi retreated to the pavilion, and Emperor Jing's angry voice came. "Come back. What else does your majesty want me to do? Tell me, what is the business?" Emperor Jing patted the table. "What business?" Li Yi looked puzzled. Li Yi sat opposite Emperor Jing, put the brocade box on the table, and took a sip of tea unhurriedly. He wanted to play this game with him. He was the one who needed money, not him. Let's see who was anxious first. "Where did you get so many glazes?" Emperor Jing looked at him and asked. "I accidentally dug a colored glass mine in my backyard. There are countless colored glasswares in it, and they are inexhaustible. I just want to take them out to make some contributions to the country. However, if I directly donate them to the national treasury, people will inevitably say that your majesty is taking advantage of me by force. I naturally can't let your majesty's reputation be tarnished, so I plan to do business with your majesty." "Are you sure?" Emperor Jing glanced at him and said. "In the whole world, all the land belongs to the king, and all the land belongs to the king. Since it was dug out from your backyard, then give it all to the country." "Of course. I'm not sure. The old emperor must have been hanging out with some shady people these days." His words were getting more and more shameless. Li Yi hurriedly said, "Actually, these glasswares were made with materials from the backyard of my house. It took me a lot of effort to make them. Although nature is the work of the gods, how could it produce such a lifelike statue of a princess?" This subject invited skilled craftsmen from the capital, and spent half a year to carve them out bit by bit. The cost of materials, labor, equipment maintenance, mental distress, were all paid by this subject myself. "You can make colored glaze?" Jing Di looked at him with a slightly shocked expression. "If your majesty wants to learn, I can teach you." Li Yi cupped his hands and said, "In a year or two, your majesty can even use glass to make the roof tiles. We are not that extravagant to make tiles out of glaze." Emperor Jing glanced at him and said, "If we really did that, I would be the first fatuous ruler recorded in the history books." Jing Di waved his hand and said, "Since this is business, what do you need me to do?" "I need your majesty to hold a glass appreciation meeting in the palace, and invite the officials and nobles of Jingdo into the palace to view it. Of course, it doesn't matter if the nobles come or not. The main thing is that their wives must come. Try not to miss a single one." Jing Di glanced at him with a faint smile and said, "You want to drag the empress into this?" Then, as if he had figured something out, he looked at Li Yi and said in astonishment, "You mean to say that in a year or two, stained glass will be sold as cheaply as tiles? Before the price of stained glass drops, you want to sell it to the nobles in the capital? Your majesty is wise." Jing Di waved his hand and said, "In this way, at that time, how will you face the nobles of Jingdo and establish yourself in Jingdo? Aren't you worried about these things?" "Why should I worry?" Li Yi asked in confusion. "I don't plan on selling glass to take advantage of the nobles. Why should I face them?" Jing Di froze for a moment and looked at him to ask, "Who did you drag into this?" "The Wang family. It is not easy for the Wang family to refuse such a thing. However, in this way, you want me to plot against my officials?" Jing Di narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Yi. He said, Li Yi, you are using this matter to frame me for injustice. What are your intentions?" Li Yi was startled, and a guilty expression appeared on his face. He bowed and said, "Your Majesty, I know I was wrong. I was blinded by greed and inadvertently caused your Majesty to fall into an unjust situation. I know I was wrong. I will go home and reflect on myself. I will not sell the glassware. I will go home and melt it to make tiles. I will leave now." A moment later, Jing Di pointed to the brocade box on the table and looked straight at Li Yi. He asked, How much do you plan to sell something like this for? Li Yi thought for a moment and said, this kind of work is meticulously carved. It is the best work. I will not sell it for less than 20,000 taels. Jingdi shook his head and said, who would spend 20,000 taels to buy a piece of glassware? 2 days ago, I sold a piece of Guanyin statue that was half the size of this for 8,000 taels. Li Yi looked at him and said, did you pay taxes to the imperial court? Jingdi asked. This is not important. Li Yi pointed to the brocade box on the table and said, Your Majesty, do you think the Cui family will buy it if the glassware in this box is priced at 20,000 taels? The craftsmen in my family are very skilled. I plan to make a few more. This is not good, is it? Jingdi hesitated after a moment of shock. Forget it. Anyway, there are too many pieces of glass. It takes up space at home. I plan to sell them for 5 copper coins per caddy. How much do you plan to donate to the national treasury? When Li Yi was about to speak, Jingdi waved his hand and said, 30%, at least 30%. You know better than me how big the impact of this matter will be. I am afraid the Wang family can't bear it. Li Yi was stunned and showed a painful expression on his face. He gritted his teeth and said, okay, 30%, 30%. Seeing that he agreed so readily, Jingdi was stunned. He rubbed his eyebrows and said, even if you are pretending to be distressed, can you be more serious? I changed my mind. I want 50%. Li Yi decided to go back and read all the books in the performance department in the library. But this time, there was no need to pretend. The Li family could not afford 50%. It was not a good thing to be greedy. The Wang family took 20% because they had to bear the anger of the nobles. The old emperor took 40% because he wanted to borrow the tiger skin dragon skin. Plus the royal publicity and operating expenses, it was not much. His family took 40%. It seemed to be a loss, but in fact, it was a big profit. As for 30%, it was really distressing. He immediately said, Your Majesty, 40%. 40%, no more. It took another quarter of an hour to finally reach an agreement with the old emperor on the distribution of the spoils. The royal family took 40%, the Li family took 40%, and the Wang family took 20%. Elder Cui statues would be made first and sold everywhere. On the same day, the Wang family would hold a charity sale in the capital. This big bargain would be given to the Cui family. No need to thank me. He had more and more common topics with the old emperor. The success of this deal was much easier than what Li Yi had expected. By the way, who did you sell the glazed statue of Guanyin to for 8,000 taels? Jingdi seemed to think of something and asked with narrowed eyes. Chapter 620. Li Yi walked out of the imperial garden with the brocade box in his arms. He passed by Changda and the middle-aged Taoist priest. The Taoist priest was not his focus, but the monk. The monk was too rich, which made the old emperor very unhappy. The court officials had money, the nobles had money, and the monk had money. He was the only one who should be the richest person in the Jing kingdom. Without money, no one would feel happy. So the monk was out of luck. These days he had to make more Buddha statues and Guanyin statues. The old emperor would not give up until he got enough money from the temples near the capital. He still had some friendship with the old monk Tan Yin. He had to remind him to make use of this time to attract believers, and to hold a ceremony to show off the glazed Guanyin statue. Otherwise, in a few days, he would not dare to say which temple he came from if he did not have a few glazed statues. He was afraid of embarrassing himself. The most important thing at the moment was to send the thing in his arms to the eldest princess. He could find the way to the morning dew hall with his eyes closed. He might just fall a few more times and hit the wall a few more times. Today was the birthday banquet of the eldest princess. As the leader of the women in the capital, her influence was second only to the empress. Naturally, she knew many women from officials and noble families. Therefore, the morning dew hall was especially lively today. The cheers and laughter inside could be heard from outside the hall. Greetings, County Uncle Li. The maidservant who was guarding the door saluted. Xiaolan, is the princess inside? Li handed the gift box to her and asked casually. The maid smiled and said, Yes, Her Highness is inside. His Royal Highness just came. Sir, you are here. The proud Lolita ran out holding Yongning's hand and said, Sir, what gift did you bring for my sister? I want to see it. I want to see it. Li slapped away her hand that was reaching for the gift box and said, Stop fooling around. You can look at it later. The noise at the door immediately attracted the attention of many people in the hall. That's County Uncle Li, the one who is as famous as Her Royal Highness and Her Royal Highness? It's him. That time in Ingsui Hall, noble consort Chui's personal maid framed Madame Li. County Uncle Li didn't even give face to noble consort Chui. At that time, I was standing behind Madame Li. He doesn't look too bad. My brother said that County Magistrate Li is very strict with his students. I don't think so. He is the dean of the mathematics school, so what's wrong with being strict with the students? I think it's good. My good-for-nothing brother has changed after staying in the mathematics school for so many days. He never liked to study before, but now every time he goes home, he will read until late at night. He also said that if he can't finish his homework, he will be punished by Prince Jean. How old is Prince Jean? How can he scare him like that? I think it's because of County Uncle Li. In the corner, Li Xian, who was sitting alone at a table, raised his head and glanced at the door. After a moment of surprise, he stood up as if he had seen his savior, and walked over with large strides. Why did you come so late? When he finally calmed down the arrogant Lolita and took Yongning's hand to walk inside, he saw Li Xian coming over. I was called by His Majesty just now. Li Yi replied and was about to walk forward. But after taking a glance, he didn't take another step. Give the gift to the princess later. I still have something to do, so I'll go first. He turned around without hesitation, but he was pulled by Li Xian and directly dragged to a corner in the hall. If you are a friend, stay and accompany me. Li Xian poured a cup of tea and handed it over. If Li Yi left, he will be the only man left in the hall. This kind of feeling was very gloomy. If he came, at least he can share some of his burden. Why don't we go? Li Yi could feel countless gazes falling on him. They were blatant and undisguised. He raised his head and glanced at them from the corner of his eye. They were really looking at him in the open. What do they mean by looking and nodding? Li Xian curled his lips disdainfully and said, If I leave now, doesn't it mean that I'm afraid? I, Li Xian, am a dignified prince and have seen all kinds of scenes. Why would I be afraid of a few women? Li Yi glanced at him and pointed at his legs. Why are you shaking if you're not afraid? Miss, look who that is. Beside a table, a young girl who was looking around in the hall glanced at a corner and was suddenly stunned. After wiping her eyes, she hurriedly pulled the pretty girl beside her and said, the girl was talking to someone in a low voice. Hearing this, she turned around and asked in confusion, What's wrong? Miss, look over there. The young girl pointed to a corner in the hall and said. The girl looked over with a puzzled look and saw a figure. The next moment, her expression suddenly changed. It's him. Seeing her abnormal expression, the slightly older girl was stunned. She looked in that direction and said, What's wrong? Su, do you know County Uncle Li and Prince Li Xian? County Uncle Li? Hearing this, the girl was stunned. It seemed that she didn't expect that the person was County Uncle Li, Li Yi, who was famous in the capital city. Yes, the one on the left is the famous County Uncle Li, the older girl explained. The girl slightly moved her eyes and asked, Then the one beside County Uncle Li? That's Li Xian, the eldest son of Prince Ning, who is also the president of the Academy of Sciences that is about to open. Li Xian, the eldest son of Prince Ning, Li Xian. The girl clenched her teeth and spat out these few words with difficulty. Li Xian looked back in surprise and didn't find anything unusual. He shook his head and said, I don't care about the Academy of Sciences. I'll leave it to my subordinates. Save a place for me in the School of Mathematics. I think if I want to develop science, I must learn mathematics well first. Well, anyway, you are always lazy at home. There is Han in the School of Mathematics. How about you help me manage the Academy of Sciences? Too lazy to pay attention to this delusional guy, Emingzi talked with several people over there. When she finished her work, she said goodbye and left. When she came out, the soup was still cooking at home. On the other side, the proud Lolita sneakily walked to the place where the gifts were piled up and whispered, "I want to see what gifts they brought for my sister." She picked up the box, untied the ribbon, and carefully opened the lid. The next moment, a ray of light flashed across her face. The proud Lolita's expression froze. She opened her mouth wide, and the gift box fell from her hand to the ground. A white hand reached out from the side and caught the gift box. Emingzu patted her head and said, "Be careful." She took the glass statue out of the box and saw the familiar face on the statue. After being stunned for a while, an expression of disbelief appeared on her face. As for the surrounding women, they had already covered their mouths and exclaimed. They stared at the statue in shock. Gulp! Li Xian, who had just walked over, swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He turned his head and looked at Li Yi with bright eyes. Li Yi thought for a while and took the gift box from the Princess Royal. After fastening it, he handed it to Li Xian with both hands. "Happy birthday. Sir, I want it too." The proud Lolita hugged his leg and refused to let go. Li Yi had no choice but to take out 2 bracelets made of beads of different colors. He gave one to her and put the other on Yongning's wrist. However, Yongning's wrist was too thin, so the bracelet was too loose on her wrist. The beads used to make the bracelet were extremely small. There were dozens of them on the bracelet. They were dazzling under the sunlight and were very eye-catching. The proud Lolita raised her wrist proudly. The sunlight shone through and left a stream of light on the ground. At a certain moment, Li suddenly felt that the atmosphere around him was not right. He looked back and saw that the eyes of the women behind him were fixed on the statue in the Princess Royal's hand, and the bracelet on the proud Lolita's wrist. In the end, they looked at him, and his breathing became heavy. Chapter 621. Looking at the greedy eyes of these ladies, Li Yi had goosebumps all over his body. It was as if he was being stared at by a pack of hungry wolves. He realized that he had done something stupid. He had greatly underestimated the attractiveness of these shiny things to women. He turned to look at Li Xian and said solemnly, 3, 2, 1, get ready. Li Xian was puzzled and asked, What? What are you counting? Run. By the time he said this word, Li Yi's body had already disappeared. There was only a flash of a shadow at the door. Finally realizing that something was wrong, Li Xian, who wanted to run away, didn't even have time to take a step before his arm was grabbed and pulled back. Countless graceful figures surrounded him, and all kinds of fragrances began to stimulate his sense of smell. Prince Li Xian, what is that? I don't know. Li Xian's face was pale, and he said with a trembling voice. You are so familiar with County Uncle Li, how can you not know? That's right, Your Highness, please tell us the truth. The voice was clear and melodious, but it was full of urgency. Li Xian's face became even paler. I really don't know. The voice beside him paused and sighed. Since Your Highness is unwilling to say, then sisters, let's go. The crowd squeezed towards the innermost area. At the same time, some people shifted their attention to Yongning and Shanning. After running out of the morning dew hall in one breath, Li finally stopped and sat on a step, gasping for breath. I'm rich. I'm definitely rich this time. It seems that regardless of modern or ancient times, these shiny things are always sought after and loved by women. There's no need to worry about glass jewelry not being able to sell. It won't be long before the jewelry market of the Jing Kingdom is completely destroyed. Without a few pieces of precious glass jewelry, how could she dare to call herself a socialite? A daughter of some rich family? Of course, the disruption of this balance was only temporary. When the largest jewelry merchant in the Jing Kingdom loses enough money, the industry will return to its previous state. After all, if things made from sand could keep earning money, the whole Jing Kingdom, or even the whole world, would be in chaos. Of course, before that, it was necessary to send people to the Qi Kingdom, the Zhao Kingdom, and other countries. After resting for a while, Li Yi's breathing gradually calmed down. He thought about it from a different perspective. Although the situation just now was dangerous, it had aroused the curiosity of those women. Next, as long as he added fuel to the fire, the preparations would be almost complete. Thinking back to how those women looked just now, it was really scary. If the two of them hadn't run so fast, Li turned around and suddenly realized that something wasn't quite right. He waited on the spot for a long time before he saw a figure stumbling out of the morning dew hall. Seeing Li Xian's disheveled hair, disheveled clothes, and one of his sleeves torn off, Li Yi was shocked as he walked over in a daze. What happened to you? Could it be? He looked in that direction in extreme shock and said, could it be that the capital's socialites are so open that they publicly defiled you? Thinking about how he had just been ravaged by dozens of married women and touched from head to toe, Li Xian looked at Li Yi with a lifeless gaze and said, I want 10 of those beads just now. I'll give them all to you. Li Yi waved his hand and said, whenever you want them, just go to your father-in-law's house and take them. Take as many as you want. The Wang family could participate in this business, but it was best for Li Xian not to provoke them. Other than the royal family, or these super-aristocratic families, offending so many influential people in the capital at the same time was something that not many families could bear. He took out a thick book and threw it to Li Xian. He said calmly, this is for you. What is it? Li Xian caught it casually. Go home and read it slowly. Li Yi waved his hand and walked straight out of the palace. Before he left the palace, he had really been cooking soup at home. Looking at the time, it should be just in time to go back. Until Li Yi's figure disappeared, Li Xian was still standing there in a daze. He flipped through the scientific principles in his hands, and had already constructed many experimental models in his mind. His breathing was rapid and his eyes glowed green. Her Royal Highness, the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom, had just celebrated her 19th birthday. A 19-year-old princess who was still unmarried was a rare sight in history. However, countless officials in the imperial court and imperial censors no longer had any opinions on this matter. In the capital and a few prefectures near the capital, the marriage time for women had been delayed by 3 years compared to a year ago. Those who were over 16 and still unmarried would no longer be regarded as old ladies who could not be married. On one hand, it was because of the national policy. On the other hand, it was because most of the poor families in the capital now relied on the shoulders of girls to support them. The farmers who used to look forward to having sons now sighed every day. Why didn't they have 2 more daughters in the beginning? That way, they could have sent them to the princess workshop. That fellow, Wang Lauer, must have done something good in his previous life. Both of his daughters were working in the princess workshop. It had only been a few months, but his house had been renovated and he was showing it off to the neighbors all day long. Recently, his wife's belly was bulging again. According to the lame old doctor 5 miles away, this time it was very likely that it was a son. Because of this, Wang Lauer, who used to be very poor and famous for being stingy, actually held a banquet at home for 3 days, which made countless people envious. Of course, people ate and drank to their heart's content for 3 days, but they didn't tell him that the old doctor's lame leg was broken because he was talking nonsense. Many of the farmers in Jingdo were filled with gratitude toward the princess they had never met because the princess had given them a way out. However, for the officials and nobles, what they cared more about was whether the 2-foot-tall glass statue that someone had given to the eldest princess on the day of her birthday banquet was real or not. Colored glass was rare to begin with, let alone a statue made of such a large piece of colored glass. This person was a little too extravagant. Later, they learned that the person who gave the princess such a big gift was the county uncle Li whom they often heard about. Before they had time to wonder where he got such a treasure, a glass statue of Guanyin worshipped by the believers in the Cold Mountain Temple caused another wave of discussion in the capital. Glass was so rare that even nobles had never seen it. Not to mention such a large glass statue. The statue of Her Highness couldn't be seen, but the statue of Guanyin in the Cold Mountain Temple could be seen with one's own eyes. For a time, there was an endless stream of people going to the Cold Mountain Temple to see the glass statue every day. Correspondingly, the temple's incense also flourished, and its reputation was unparalleled for a while, overshadowing all the temples near the capital, including the Fahua Temple. After the emperor personally inscribed the 4 words, Holy Land of Buddhism, for the Cold Mountain Temple, the other temples finally couldn't sit still. For the temples, the most important thing was, of course, believers and incense. In daily life, people competed for believers and incense, but it was just a small quarrel. Unexpectedly, The old bald donkey in the cold mountain temple even brought out such a big killing weapon as the glass statue of Guanyin. What was glass? It was one of the 7 treasures of Buddhism. Such a large piece of glass was an invincible weapon to attract believers. No, if it goes on like this, the Fahua temple will be completely suppressed by the cold mountain temple. Investigate. We must find out where the cold mountain temple got that glass statue. Send loyal believers to the cold mountain temple to inquire. We can't just sit and wait for death. In several famous temples in the capital, the famous monks with great virtue, who usually looked solemn and dignified, now looked very anxious. Chapter 622. In a temple near the capital city. In the meditation room, a little monk said, I don't know how the glazed Guanyin statue of the cold mountain temple came about. They are very tight-lipped, so I didn't get any information. However, it is said that Li Yi, the county earl of Chang, gave the princess a glazed statue at her birthday party. Many people saw it at that time. The old monk frowned and asked, Oh, do you know where Li Yi got the glazed statue? The little monk said, It is said that he bought it from several foreign merchants. I can't get any more information. In another temple, foreign merchants? The middle-aged monk pondered for a while and said, Tell the disciples in the city to pay more attention to the foreign merchants in the city these days. Then he thought of another thing and asked, By the way, what did philanthropist Zhang say when he went to the cold mountain temple? Philanthropist Zhang was a loyal pilgrim of the Fahua temple. He would donate thousands of taels of incense money every year. This time, he asked him to go to the cold mountain temple to get some information. The young monk looked embarrassed and said, Philanthropist Zhang saw the glazed statue there, and then what? Seeing him hesitating, the middle-aged monk asked. Then he donated 1,000 taels of incense money to the cold mountain temple. Tan Yin, you old bald donkey, the Fahua temple is irreconcilable with you. A furious voice came from the meditation room. Not long after, the young monk walked out of the meditation room. After looking back, he shook his head and sighed. Although it was a taboo to steal believers and incense money from other temples, his master called the monks of the cold mountain temple bald donkeys. Didn't he also curse him? Brotherly, does your guardian Fong have some misunderstandings about me? Walking on the street, Wang Yong looked back and asked Li Yi in confusion. Why do you say that, Brother Wang? Li looked back at him and asked. I always feel that there is something wrong with the way he looks at me. Wang Yong thought for a while, shook his head and said, Maybe I'm wrong. After all, something worth thousands of taels of silver had been smashed by him just like that. With Fong's character of treating money as his own life, it was already very restrained that he didn't twist his head off and kick it like a ball. Of course, Li Yi couldn't tell him the reason. He waved his hand and said, Brother Wang, you don't have to think too much about it. He might have been scolded by his wife yesterday, so he hasn't been in a good mood these days. Brother Wang, don't take it to heart. That should be the case. Wang Yong nodded. Thinking of something, he looked at Li Yi and asked, The glazed goddess of mercy in the cold mountain temple is also from Brother Li, right? Li Yi nodded and said, Yes, Brother Wang also knows that our Jing kingdom doesn't produce colored glaze. Instead, it's those foreign merchants who often travel thousands of miles to sell these things. This time, we were lucky enough to meet a few who were short of money and eager to sell, so we bought all of them at a low price. Wang Yong was stunned for a moment and asked, Didn't Brother Li say that it was dug out from the colored glaze mine? Oh really? Wang Yong nodded and said, Yes. Li looked at him and said, Brother Wang, remember, you can't say such things in the future. The things dug out from the mine have to be handed over to the country. Wang Yong looked at him and nodded as if he understood. Young master, I'm back. Fong had just gone to inspect the shop. At this moment, he caught up from behind and said something to Li Yi. Then he turned to look at Wang Yong, and his face instantly darkened. Wang Yong's face was filled with doubt as he asked, Dare I ask this brother, am I? What brother? I don't have a prodigal brother like you. Fong's face darkened and said, If you were my younger brother, I would have broken your legs. Why do you say that, brother? Wang Yong looked even more confused. You still dare to ask. seeing that Fong was about to roll up his sleeves, Li hurriedly pulled him away and whispered, "This is a guest, don't be impolite." He turned to Wang Yong and smiled apologetically. "Brother Wang, I'm sorry, Fong was a little emotional today. Don't blame me, don't blame me." Seeing Li pull the big man away, Wang Yong stood in the same place, looked at the attendants beside him, and then looked in the direction where they left, confused. "Young master, if you hadn't pulled me just now, I would have made him pay a few thousand taels of silver." Not seeing Wang Yong, Fong was still angry. All right, don't treat people like that in the future. It's just a glass ball, it's not worth much." Li Yi waved his hand and changed the topic, asking, "What happened to the shop just now?" Fong curled his lips and said, "A few foreign merchants, I don't know what they did, but they were stopped in the shop. They delayed our business in broad daylight, so I chased them all out." When the people of the capital addressed foreigners, it also depended on the situation. If it was the Qi kingdom, the Zhao kingdom, or the Wu kingdom, they would address them as people of Qi, Zhao, and so on. After all, they all had yellow skin, black hair, and black eyes. Although they fought wars, they still treated each other as people of the same race. And to address them as foreigners, it was somewhat derogatory. Those merchants from small foreign countries with different skin colors, hair colors, and appearances from ordinary people could be recognized at a glance when they walked on the streets of the capital. As for the treatment they received in the capital, it was naturally not on the same level as the other big countries. "I don't know what's going on, but these days, it seems like everyone is looking for those foreign merchants," Fong muttered. A few people hurried past him, faintly hearing them discuss things like Cold Mountain Temple and colored glass statue. Li shook his head and continued to walk forward. This was actually not part of his original plan. The colored glass statue sold to the old monk had such a great publicity effect. And in the past few days, there were many people who came to his house to ask about the origin of the colored glass statue for the princess. Those socialites and noble ladies also knew how to use a roundabout strategy. Fortunately, he had already reminded Rui to push all the blame on the foreign merchants. In this way, he did not even need to do anything extra. He only needed to wait for the old emperor's appraisal conference to take out the few treasured colored glass wares in the palace and sell them at a low price to the nobles in the capital. Only then would the groundwork for this matter be completed. Next, it was time for the Wang family to make their appearance. So far, what he needed to do was to sit at home and wait to count the money after the Wang family's charity sale. Of course, he had to count the money in secret, and he could not let others, especially Mississippi Lu, see it. "Young master." Li Yi was thinking about these things in his mind, walking unconsciously, when he suddenly heard Fong's voice. Li Yi turned around and looked at him, asking, "What's the matter?" Fong folded his arms and looked at him with a strange expression, saying nothing. "Crazy." Li Yi turned around and took 2 steps forward. His footsteps suddenly stopped. He looked around, and if he took a few more steps, he would step into that familiar yet strange little courtyard. He had actually walked here unknowingly. "Young master, why did you stop?" Fong's teasing voice came from behind. "Shut up." Li Yi turned around and walked back. "Hey Li, you're finally here." A clear voice came from behind, full of surprise. Li Yi turned around and saw Xiao Chui coming out of the courtyard, her face full of joy. Chapter 623. The young lady is sleeping. I will go wake her up. Xiao Chui seemed to be very happy. She walked into the yard and had Li Yi and Fong sit on the stone bench. Then she turned around and walked to Zheng Zimo's room. Li Yi asked in surprise, "She has been sleeping since last night?" Xiao Chui turned around and said, "The young lady was designing the clothes last night and only went to sleep at dawn." Li Yi was startled. He then waved his hand and said, "Never mind, don't wake her up. Let her rest." Xiao Chui shook her head and said firmly, "No, I have to wake the young lady. No rush, let her sleep a bit longer." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'm a bit thirsty after walking here. Xiao Chui, go pour 2 cups of tea." Xiao Chui thought about it and finally nodded. Okay. Sigh, Xiao Chui went in to make tea. Fong shook his head and sighed. Li Yi glanced at him. "Why are you sighing?" Young master, you don't know why I'm sighing? Why should I know why you're sighing? I know that every time you come back from the palace and pass by this street, you have to get off the carriage and walk through this alley. Young master, you don't know why I'm sighing? Li looked at him and said, that's because there's a traffic jam on this street. Feng looked at him and asked seriously, if the young lady can't have children, are you going to stay like this for the rest of your life, just like these months? This time Li didn't look at him and didn't say anything. Feng looked at him again and sighed. He shook his head and said, I'm sighing because I can't bear to part with the silver. I will get it back from that Wang person sooner or later. Xiao Chui quickly came out with 2 cups of hot tea and a plate of flour cakes. Li pinched a piece and put it in his mouth. It was still a familiar taste, but he hadn't tasted it for a long time. How long was it? 2 months. 3 months. 4 months. Li swallowed the piece of osmanthus cake and asked, where is Miss Ruoqing? Xiao Chui sat down on a stone bench and said, Jiejie Ruoqing and Xiaozhu will be back very late. Take me to the art studio. Li ate 2 pieces of osmanthus cake, took a sip of tea and stood up. Oh. Xiao Chui nodded and led him into the moon gate. What kind of sin did I commit? Feng threw a piece of osmanthus cake into his mouth and looked inside. He shook his head slightly with a sad expression on his face. Li had been to this art studio many times before, but the layout now was very different. There were drawings hanging on the shelves on one side, and it could be seen that the ink had not dried long ago. They should have been drawn a few hours ago. Xiao Chui pointed at the paintings and said, these are the clothes that Miss drew last night. Don't call your miss yet. Let her have a good rest. Li sat down at the table. The brush happened to be in a convenient position. A painting on the table was half finished. Li put it aside and laid down a new piece of xian paper. Research on China's ancient clothing, China's clothing catalog, China's clothing history. A look at the costumes of ancient period dramas. As for ancient period clothing, it was best to look good. There was no need to cater to the trends of this era, because the clothes sold by the clothing stores in the capital were the trends. Xiao Chui stood to the side and watched. In less than a quarter of an hour, there was a kind of beautiful clothing that she had never seen before appearing on the paper. Her expression couldn't help but be startled. She blinked and asked curiously, Li, what kind of clothes are these? This is called a wide-sleeved flowing dress. Li had already laid down a new piece of xian paper, and said casually, I've never heard of it. Xiao Chui thought for a moment and said with some doubt, it's normal that you haven't heard of it. While drawing, Li said, speaking of this dress, I have to tell you a legend from a long time ago. It is said that 1,000 years ago, there was a country called the Jiang country. At that time, the Jiang country was facing the attack of an enemy country. The flames of war raged everywhere, and the people were plunged into misery and suffering. Long Kuei was the princess of the Jiang country. She lived in the imperial palace with her brother Long Yang since childhood. This wide-sleeved flowing dress was Long Kuei's favorite dress. Then. Xiao Chui grasped the sleeves and asked nervously. Then, Prince Long Yang died on the battlefield, and the Jiang country perished. Long Kuei blamed herself and regretted it. She felt that there was nothing left for her to live for. She jumped into the boundless flames and sealed her soul in a demonic sword. Ah! Xiao Chui's body trembled, and the tears in her eyes immediately rolled down. Li swore that he really just wanted to tell a few stories. Otherwise, it would be too boring to draw here alone. He didn't want to cheat the little girl's tears. Although when he watched The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3, he also shed a lot of tears because of certain scenes. Xiao Chui, what are you doing in the studio? A voice came from outside the door. Zheng Zima walked in from outside, sounding a little tired. Li raised his head to take a look, and his jaw dropped in shock. Of course, the surprise this time wasn't because she wasn't wearing any clothes. In fact, she was wrapped up very tightly in her pajamas. However, her slightly messy hair and haggard face showed that she had just woken up and hadn't even washed up when she stepped on the wooden floor with her bare feet. It was the first time that Li saw a goddess like this. Zheng Zimo glanced at Xiao Chui's face first, then fixed her eyes on Li. After rubbing her sleepy eyes, she looked at Xiao Chui again. When she spoke again, Her voice suddenly became fierce. Xiao Chui, did he bully you? Xiao Chui was stunned for a moment, then immediately said, No, miss, you misunderstood. Li didn't bully me. He just told me a story and I shed tears. Not long after, Zheng Zimo looked at her with some dissatisfaction and said, Isn't it just a made-up story? Is it worth it? Xiao Chui took out a handkerchief from her sleeve, handed it over and said, Miss, wipe your tears too. Stupid girl. Zheng Zimo rolled up her sleeves, and Xiao Chui turned around and ran. Come back. When she ran to the door, she was stopped by Zheng Zimo. The goddess looked back at her and said, Give me the handkerchief. Isn't this Uncle Li? How come you have time to come here today? Zheng Zimo sat down opposite Li Yi and picked up the sample drawing he had just drawn. She asked casually, Are you here to see if we are slacking off? Don't worry, Sister Ruoqing and I are worthy of our monthly wages. Li Yi didn't say anything. He just looked straight at her. Even though she was looking at the sample drawing, she was a little embarrassed by Li Yi's gaze. She raised her head and asked with some embarrassment and anger, What are you looking at? Don't you need to wash up and change your clothes? Li Yi asked tentatively. Zheng Zimo looked up at him, then lowered her head to continue looking at the drawing. She said, Rouge and face powder are very expensive. I don't want to waste it. Li Yi suddenly thought of a truth from the future. Women could lie to men at will, but they would never waste their own cosmetics. If a woman didn't even bother to put on makeup when she saw you, he sighed, suddenly feeling a little heartbroken. Chapter 624. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. He thought it would be awkward when they met again, but the awkwardness was washed away by Miss Zheng's nonchalant, I don't want to waste it. How is it? Li put down his brush and pointed at the drawing in her hand. Wide-sleeved fairy dress. Zheng Zimo put down the drawing and looked at the other two. I've never seen this style before, but it can be used. She glanced at Li Yi and asked, You even know about women's clothes? Clothes are nothing. You don't know, but I actually know women's minds very well. Li Yi pointed at the picture and said, The wide-sleeved fairy dress isn't just a wide-sleeved fairy dress. There's also a touching story behind it. When the time comes, we'll put up a sign and write down the story. Then we'll put it in the shop and let every woman who enters the shop see it. Once we've earned enough women's tears, the grade of the dress will rise. This is called packaging and marketing. In the future, every new set of clothes can be packaged in this way, and then let the brothel advertise it. I'm sure it will sell well. Zheng Zimo glanced at Li Yi. You said you know women's minds? What did that disdainful smile at the corner of her mouth mean? Mockery, disdain, personal attack? He was talking about a serious matter. The point was not whether he knew women's minds or not. There was no way to continue this conversation. It had always been the conversation that died. Today was the second time he had been talked to death. They hadn't seen each other for a few months, and he wasn't sure if today was one of those special days. Li Yi decided to focus on drawing so that Miss Zheng wouldn't stay up all day. There weren't many bosses who were so considerate of their employees. Xiao Chui came in from outside and asked, Li, I'm going out to buy some food. Do you need me to bring some for you and that uncle? There were still many drawings to be drawn. Li Yi estimated that he wouldn't be able to leave for a while, so he wasn't in a hurry. He stood up and said, Forget it. Is there rice and noodles in the kitchen? I'll make it. Xiao Chui nodded her head and said, Yes, Sister Ruoqing sometimes comes back to cook. There are rice, noodles, and vegetables. Watching Li Yi walk past her and straight into the kitchen, Xiao Chui's face was filled with excitement. She had heard that Li Yi's cooking was delicious, but she had never tried it before. At this moment, her heart was filled with anticipation. Uncle Fong, what do you want to ask? Miss Xiao Chui, are you familiar with Xiao Hong? Of course we're familiar with Sister Xiao Hong. Back then, in the Jade Courtyard, Sister Xiao Hong would always accidentally break things. It was Miss who helped her a few times. Li Yi was cooking in the kitchen. Fong was a little unhappy because Xiao Chui called him uncle. He corrected her a few times and called her big brother Fong, instead of Uncle Fong. He was very patient. Okay, Uncle Fong. Xiao Chui nodded and said, Uncle Fong, if you don't have anything else to do, just sit here for a while. I'll go to the kitchen to help Li. Yes, big brother Fong. Fong sat back on the stone bench dejectedly and corrected her for the last time. Okay, Uncle Fong. I'll go now. Xiao Chui jogged all the way to the kitchen and ran out after a while, because she didn't even know how to cut vegetables. What kind of young lady would have what kind of servant girl? Neither master nor servant had the talent to cook. Just like Mississippi Lu, they were born to be young ladies. Xiao Chui sat on the stone bench and held her chin. She glanced at the kitchen, then turned back to look at Fong and said, Big brother Fong, is Li Yi's cooking really delicious? Fong took a deep breath and said, I'll say it for the last time. It's Uncle Fong, not Big brother Fong. I understand, Uncle Fong. Xiao Chui looked at him and said with a pitiful expression, Of course the food cooked by the son-in-law is delicious. It's not that Uncle Fong wants to brag, but the son-in-law's cooking is rare in the world. I guarantee that after eating it for the first time, you'll want to. Fong suddenly covered his face and buried his head. Want to what? Xiao Chui blinked and asked. Fong raised his head and said dejectedly, Miss Xiao Chui, let's do it again, okay? Okay, Uncle Fong. Bang. A loud noise came from the yard. Then came Xiao Chui's panicked voice. Uncle Fong, what's wrong? Don't hit your head on the table. The four of them only needed to make 4 simple dishes and a soup. In principle, these dishes weren't enough for Fong alone. However, the kitchen didn't have enough food, so he had to restrain himself today. When all the dishes were served, Zheng Zimo finally arrived. Li looked up at her and found that she had already combed her hair and changed her clothes. She must have put on some light makeup. Although she looked good without any makeup, it was obvious that she looked more like a doll than before. Miss Xiao Chui, let's go eat over there. Tell Big Brother Fong about Xiao Hong's past in the Jade Courtyard. Lao Fong put some food into his bowl. When he left, he also dragged Xiao Chui, who kept stuffing rice into her mouth, away. There were only 2 people left at the table, and the atmosphere was a bit awkward, because there were some things that Li Yi didn't know how to explain to her. Miss Zheng was the first to break the silence. I heard that you gave Her Royal Highness a glass statue? So the atmosphere became even more awkward. Fong, come here. Li Yi waved to Fong. What's the matter, son-in-law? Fong was listening to the exciting part. When he walked over, his expression was still a bit unsatisfied. Li looked at him and said, Give me the small package hidden in your sleeve. Fong's expression changed. Son-in-law, what small package? Don't dawdle, hurry up. Fong reluctantly took out a small package from his sleeve. Li took it from him and opened it in front of Zheng Zimo. Clatter. A pile of colorful, sparkling objects formed a small hill on the table. Li looked up at Fong, and a few black lines appeared on his forehead. Was this guy planning to let Xiao Hong buy the entire Jade Courtyard in the capital? These bracelets, earrings, headdress. If they were really sold, it would be more than enough to buy 2 Jade Courtyards. The problem was that it was a crime to be rich. Could a little girl like Xiao Hong keep these things? The expression on Fong's face was a bit awkward. He scratched his head and said, Son-in-law, I took it from my share. Xiao Chui sat on the side eating and was suddenly blinded by a light. After turning around to look, she screamed and pounced at him. Is this for the young lady? She looked at the things on the table, and her eyes were shining. She looked up at Li Yi and asked expectantly, Xiao Chui. Looking at the glass ornaments on the table, Zheng Zimo was also lost in thought for a moment, but she quickly recovered and glared at Xiao Chui. Li glanced at Fong. Fong gritted his teeth and nodded. Li looked at her and nodded. You guys take a look first. If you like it, I'll have someone send some more tomorrow. We? Can I pick 2? Xiao Chui asked in disbelief. Li nodded and said, When Xiao Zhu comes back, you 2 pick a few as well. Thank you, Li. Li Yi stopped Xiao Chui from rushing over and said, Let's eat first. We'll talk after eating. Xiao Chui picked up a bracelet and put it on her wrist. She didn't even eat and stood in the courtyard, raising her wrist to look at the sun. This is glass? Zheng Zimo picked up a necklace and asked curiously. Sort of. There was only one word difference between glass and glass, so it wasn't wrong to say that. Zheng Zimo looked at the things on the table and asked, "Are these the things you gave to the two little princesses?" "Yes." Li Yi nodded. "What does the glass look like for the eldest princess?" "I'm full. I'm going to draw." Li Yi put down his chopsticks, stood up, and walked to the art room. He forgot to check the almanac again today. It must be written that drawing is good, not chatting. Chapter 625. In the yard, Fang and Xiao Chui were chatting enthusiastically. They had endless common topics about the Jade Yard and a girl named Xiao Hong. In the studio, Li Yi thought for a moment and continued to draw. In addition, he also wrote down the story behind each type of clothing. If there wasn't one, he would make it up. As long as he had enough imagination, he could even draw what the 7 fairies in Chang'e wore. Wearing clothes was not only to protect the body from the cold, but also to talk about feelings. He wanted the first thing the women in the capital thought about when they got up in the morning was whether they should wear the weaver style, the fairy style, or the Chang'e style. If they wore the fairy style, red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple, which series would better reflect their mood? Women's wardrobes would always be short of one piece of clothing. What they had to do was to benefit the majority of women and make up for their lack of clothing. Women's clothing was constantly improving, and the dyes were becoming more diverse. The reform of the Jing Kingdom's clothing industry was beginning to take shape. In the studio, Zheng Zimo sat on the side and took over the drawings that Li Yi had drawn. As she flipped through them, she would occasionally add something to them. She had changed them, so Li Yi didn't need to look at them anymore. He could only be considered a plagiarist at best. His opponent was a true master. He just lacked a library and his knowledge was limited by the times. Li Yi finished a drawing and looked outside. He said casually, "It's almost noon. Do you want to go out for a walk?" Zheng Zimo put down the drawing and looked at him. "Why, don't you?" Li Yi was halfway through his sentence when he suddenly stopped. Zheng Zimo stared at him and asked, "How did you know?" She had the habit of walking in the alley after lunch every day. On the one hand, it was for digestion. On the other hand, she wanted to see more of the clothes of the women in the capital and seek some inspiration. However, this habit had only been formed 2 months ago. How could he know? Li Yi lowered his head and pretended to say casually, "Well, Xiao Chui told me." "Ahem, that means you have to think about how to make up an excuse." Zheng Zimo glanced at him and said, "I'll go ask Xiao Chui." Ahem, actually the people in the tea house across the street told me." Li Yi raised his head and glanced at her, saying, "You know that you and Lady Ruoqing have special statuses, and that incident happened not too long ago. There are many people watching." "You coughed twice this time." Zheng Zimo looked at him and asked, "The person I saw before, was it really you?" "No." The room fell into silence. Fang walked in from outside and said, "Son-in-law, we have to go to the Wang family this afternoon to discuss some matters. It's getting late." There were still many drawings that had not been drawn. Li Yi thought about it and said, "Send someone to the Wang family to tell them that I have something to do today and will visit them tomorrow." "Then all right." Fang shook his head helplessly and walked out of the house. "Go and do your work." Zheng Zimo stood up and said, "After looking at these drawings, I have a lot of ideas in my mind. I'll draw the rest." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "It's fine, it's not a big deal. It's fine to be late by 1 day. You didn't sleep well last night, go rest first." Zheng Zimo nodded and turned to walk out of the studio. "Brother Fang, have you really seen such a large glass ball?" In the yard, Xiao Chui's eyes were full of light as she looked at Fang with admiration. Fang waved his hand and said, "Of course a fist-sized glass ball is nothing. I've seen bigger ones." Xiao Chui's expression became even more admiring. She asked, "How much can a fist-sized glass ball sell for?" A smile appeared on Fang's face and he said, "Guess." 100 taels? Xiao Chui said tentatively. 10,000 taels. Fang pointed at the bracelet on her wrist and said, "Don't underestimate this thing you're wearing. It's worth at least 3,000 taels of silver." Xiao Chui's expression froze. She looked at the beautiful beads on her wrist in disbelief. Fong revealed a pained expression and said, 10,000 taels of silver. It was broken by that prodigal Wang Yong. If it weren't for the fact that the young master didn't mind, I would have taught him a lesson. Wang Yong. Wang family. Seng Zimo stood in the hallway and looked into the room. She murmured, the Wang family of Luochuan? Xiao Chui had already taken off the beads on her wrist and carefully wrapped them up. She asked in confusion, Brother Fong, why? 10,000 taels of silver can buy a lot of things. If you break something, you should ask them to pay for it. Fong nodded in agreement and said, yes, the young master said that the Wang family of Luochuan who sells apples is the richest family in the Jing kingdom. This time, the business with them involves at least 2 million taels of silver. Bah, so what if they're rich? They don't even know how to pay for things they break, scum. The Wang family of Luochuan. Seng Zimo took a deep breath and spat out these 4 words softly. Miss Sung actually came over with a cup of hot tea. Li Yi's heart, which had been riddled with holes today, finally felt a little bit of comfort. But this time she didn't leave. She sat at another table on the side and seemed to be continuing with the unfinished drawings from last night. Li didn't look anymore after a glance. There were still many drawings that needed to be drawn. After having the drawings, the next step was to sew them. At least for the next half a year, she wouldn't have to work so hard alone. He didn't know how many drawings she had drawn, but there was already a thick stack of rice paper next to her. Li put down the brush and stretched his body. When he raised his head, he couldn't help but be slightly stunned. He saw that she had folded her hands on the table and rested her head on it. He didn't know when she had fallen asleep. Even in her sleep, he could see the trace of exhaustion between her brows. After 5 o'clock in the morning, the temperature was a little low. Li got up and walked over. He took off the outer robe and gently put it on her. He looked down for a long time, looking at the face that he hadn't seen for a long time but was still unusually familiar. His expression was a little complicated. I'm sorry you didn't see wrong, he whispered and walked out of the room with extremely light footsteps. The sky was already a little dark. Fong lay on the stone table in the courtyard and looked at the sunset in a daze. Let's go. Li walked to his side and said something. Old Fong suddenly came to his senses and stood up abruptly. He was about to leave with Li Yi when he seemed to have discovered something. A look of shock appeared on his face. Young master, where are your clothes? The moment the two stepped out of the courtyard, in the slightly dim room, the woman opened her eyes. In the darkness, there was something more sparkling than glass. I can't give it to you. Fong scratched his head gloomily. Xiao Hong's birthday was coming soon. Originally, he was going to give her some glass jewelry as a gift, but after hearing the young master's words, he was a little hesitant. If a female servant girl who did odd jobs in a brothel had jewelry that could buy a few brothels like this, wouldn't it be a little too ostentatious? He couldn't be by her side all the time. What if he met someone who was greedy for her money? I'll give it to you later. Fong sighed. He shook his head. Just as he was about to go home, a voice came from behind him. Uncle Fong, come here for a moment. I have something to ask you. Fong turned around and saw the woman standing in the courtyard. After a moment of shock, he immediately walked over and asked, Eldest miss, what's the matter? Chapter 626. The maidservants of the Li family secretly gathered together and looked towards a certain direction in the courtyard. A few of their heads came closer and whispered, Say, Uncle Fong is such a powerful person. Why is he so afraid of Auntie Fong? That's right, I can't figure it out. Even if all the guards in the family were to work together, they wouldn't be a match for Uncle Fong. A young servant girl revealed an expression of admiration and said, But I often see Uncle Fong being chased and beaten by Aunt Fong with a broom. What does this have to do with being powerful? I heard from others that Madame's martial arts are very high, but she is still so gentle to Lord Ju. Yes, this kind of thing has nothing to do with being powerful. Second Miss's martial arts is also very high. In front of Second Miss, isn't Lord Ju the same as Uncle Fong meeting Aunt Fong? What are you guys talking about? Li walked over from the side. The maidservants immediately laughed dryly and scattered like birds and beasts. The maids of the Li family were all spoiled. They were not lazy, but they had the habit of gathering together and gossiping. He wondered if the maids of other noble families were the same? Son-in-law. Fong walked over from the front and laughed dryly at him. Li Yi's smile looked forced no matter how he looked at it. Get someone to prepare a carriage. We are going to the Wang family in a while. Prepare another gift. It doesn't need to be too rich. The Wang family is not short of money. He was delayed yesterday and stood the head of the Wang family up. It was not good to delay it today. After all, the reason why he was going to the Wang family was because the head of the Wang family had a special status. He could not let the head of the Wang family of Luochuan visit him. Fong scratched his head and said, Son-in-law, I have something to do later. Let old Su and the others accompany you. Remember to bring a few more guards. Li Yi waved his hand and said, It doesn't matter. Just get someone to prepare the carriage. Also, you can take whatever you want. Just think about it before you send it. Don't regret it when something happens. Fong nodded and said, Yes, son-in-law. I understand. In the courtyard, Xiao Chui held up a few glass balls. After the sunlight shone on them, there were colorful spots on the ground. She happily put these things away. Brother Fong said they were all treasures that could be sold for a lot of money. Miss and Sister Ruoqing did not choose much. They only took one each and threw these things to her and Xiao Zhu. The treasures had to be hidden well, and could not be seen by others. If thousands of silver were stolen, they would want to die. There was a knock on the door, and Xiao Chui's face lit up. Young Master Li had said that if they didn't like the glass, he would have someone send another box over today. She put the glass balls into her clothes and trotted to the door. She wasn't worried that it was a bad person knocking on the door. Bad people wouldn't be able to get close to this small courtyard. He quickly opened the door and saw the people standing outside. The smile on his face became even brighter. Brother Fong, you're here. Li. In the next moment, Xiao Chui's expression froze. She looked at the figure behind Lao Fong and asked curiously, Sister, is there something you need? The woman smiled and asked, Is Miss Zheng home? Xiao Chui nodded. She looked at Lao Fong, then at the unfamiliar woman and said, Yes, Miss is in the studio. Wide-sleeve dress, pleated rui dress, purple silk dress, cloud goose fine brocade dress. How did you come up with these strange names? In the studio, Zheng Zimo combed the hair on her forehead and flipped through the bound album as she whispered. Today she still did not put on any makeup and stood barefoot before the table. The room was covered with wooden flooring. Usually, other than her and Xiao Chui, no one would come in. Many rules and restrictions were tossed aside. Women's clothing had always been richer than men's since ancient times. These days, she had come into contact with many, but she had never seen any of the clothes in this album. For a person who didn't understand a woman's thoughts to be able to design such an exquisite dress for women, it was indeed a miracle. She sighed in her heart. Xiao Chui walked in and said, Miss, a sister is looking for you. Tell her to wait for a moment. I will go out right away. Usually there would be female shopkeepers looking for her. Zheng Zimo was about to put down the album, freshen up, and go out when a figure walked out from behind Xiao Chui. The woman smiled and said, Sorry to disturb you. Miss Zheng, please don't take offense. Pa. The album in Zheng Zimo's hand fell to the ground. After a moment, she took a deep breath and picked up the album. She put it on the table and said with a smile, It's not really a disturbance. Li. Madam Li, come in. Damned heavens. In the outer courtyard, Fong sat on a stone bench and looked back at the moon gate. He shook his head and sighed with a complicated expression. Zimo is not suitable to see guests like this. Madam Li, please wait a moment. I will go wash up and be back soon. Zheng Zimo looked at Rui and said apologetically. Rui smiled and said, We are all family. Miss Zimo, you don't have to be so polite. Zheng Zimo was startled. She didn't know what she meant by family, but she didn't insist anymore. She sat down opposite her and asked, I wonder why Madam Li is here today? Rui looked into her eyes and said, Perhaps this request is a bit presumptuous, but in any case, I still want to ask Miss Zimo to listen to me. Madam Li, please go ahead. Zheng Zimo nodded and said, Miss Zimo, likes husband, right? The smile on Zhang Zimo's face froze and then turned a little pale. She looked up at the woman opposite her, who she had no confidence to beat in terms of appearance, figure, or temperament. She opened her mouth but didn't say anything in the end. She barely managed to keep calm. However, what the woman said next made her body tremble. Her expression changed greatly. She could no longer maintain this trace of calmness. The voice of the woman opposite her trembled and she said, "Since Miss Zimo also likes husband, then why not? Why not marry into the Li family? Miss, what's wrong with you?" After sending Uncle Fong and the beautiful sister out, Xiao Chui walked into the studio again. Seeing her Miss's expression, she hurriedly asked, "Miss, what's wrong with you? Did that sister bully you just now? Miss, what's wrong with you? Say something." Zhang Zimo removed Xiao Chui's hand from her shoulder and said, "I'm fine. Xiao Chui, you go out first. I want to be alone." "Miss, go out." Xiao Chui's eyes were full of tears. She looked at Zhang Zimo again, then slowly left and closed the door. "What is this?" A choked voice came from the room, and 2 lines of tears finally fell from her pretty face. "Miss, what are we going to do now? Go home?" Old Fong leaned against the carriage and turned around to ask, "Let's go back." A voice came from the carriage. Fong looked down at a drop of moisture on the carriage beside him. After a moment of silence he asked, "Did Miss Zhang agree?" This time, there was no response from the carriage. Fong gently waved the whip, and the carriage slowly moved. "Miss, don't you understand the young master?" He gazed into the distance and sighed. He said softly, "If Miss doesn't have a son, the young master will never take a concubine in this life. Selling dates. Fresh dates, freshly picked dates. Try them before you buy them. They're not sweet, but they're free." On the side of the street, a vendor with 2 baskets of dates was selling them with all his might. A voice finally came from the carriage. "Xiao Huan likes dates. Uncle Fong, stop for a moment and buy some dates." "Okay." Fong jumped off the carriage and walked to the vendor. He asked, "Are your dates sweet?" The vendor chuckled and said, "Don't worry, sir. These are all fresh dates. Try them all. They're free if they're not sweet." Fong picked one from the basket and threw it into his mouth. In the next moment, his face twitched and he spat out the date. He looked at the vendor and said angrily, "This is so sour. What do you mean free if they're not sweet? Who gave you the confidence?" Looking at the strong man in front of him, the vendor said weakly, "Sir, you've tasted them wrong. This is a sour date. The other basket is a sweet date. Miss, I've bought them." Fong got back into the carriage and handed a paper bag in. He curled his lips and said, "Selling dates with sour dates and sweet dates? A caddy of sweet dates is actually more expensive by 5 copper coins. This unscrupulous merchant." The carriage was silent for a moment before a voice came again. "Uncle Fong, if there are any sour dates, please go and buy some back." Chapter 627. Why are these dates so sour? When he came out of the room and took 2 dates from Rui's dressing table, Li Yi's expression was a little twisted. "No, the dates that Miss bought today are very sweet." Xiao Huan took out a date from her bag and put it in Li Yi's mouth. "If you don't believe me, try it." "That's strange," Li Yi muttered. Could it be that his luck was too bad just now? The 2 dates he casually picked up were both so sour? Then he seemed to think of something and asked Xiao Huan, "Did Miss go out today?" The servant girl nodded and said, "Yes, she went out this morning. Miss bought these dates when she came back." Fong, who was standing behind, shook his head and said, "Sour and sweet are all part of life. So what if it's sour, so what if it's sweet? If there's bitterness in the heart, it's all bitterness." Li Yi turned around to look at him and asked, "Did you suffer again today?" "Young master, I didn't betray you." Fong's expression changed and he hurriedly explained, "You went to the jade courtyard behind Mrs. Fong's back?" Li Yi looked at him with bright eyes. "No." Fong breathed a sigh of relief and said, "I really didn't betray you today. Young master, if there's nothing else, I'll go back first." "Wait." Li Yi stopped him in time. "Young master, is there anything else?" Li Yi looked at him and asked, What did you say just now? What betrayal? Liuli's affairs were almost done, and all the arrangements had been made. What happened next didn't have much to do with him, so he left it to the old emperor and the Wang family. What are you doing here instead of taking care of your Academy of Science? Li Yi sat in the courtyard and looked at Li Xian and asked. The Academy of Science had just opened, and this guy had undertaken many research projects. How could he have the time to wander around? Li Xian sat down and said, I feel more and more that without a good foundation in mathematics, there are a lot of things that can't be done. Do you have any secret manuals that are more advanced than the ones that the students in the Faculty of Mathematics can master faster? Li Yi waved his hand and said, I don't have any secret manuals. If you want to learn mathematics, you should listen to the classes with the students of the mathematics department. Yesterday, there were 10 students who entered the department. Li Han is responsible for helping them catch up on their knowledge. You can listen with them. All right then. It was rare that Li Xian didn't pester him. Then excitement appeared on his face and he said, Oh yes, there's another great thing I want to tell you today. Li Yi rubbed the space between his eyebrows and asked casually, What is it? Is the crown princess pregnant? Li Xian was taken aback. He looked at him and asked, How did you know? Li Yi's hand froze. He looked at him and asked, Is the crown princess really pregnant? Li Xian scratched his head and said, The royal doctor said it shouldn't be wrong. Her Highness took her to the palace today. If I want to see her in the future, I have to apply in advance. Li looked back and saw Rui walk into the room. Congratulations. He cupped his hands to Li Xian and lay down in disappointment. He gritted his teeth and said, Xiaohuan, see the guest out. Cold Mountain Temple. The young monk bowed respectfully to Master Tan Yin and said, Master, the palace has sent out an invitation to attend the glass appreciation event. Do you want to go? No need. Tan Yin shook his head and said, It would be rude of us to be absent from His Majesty's summons. Give this invitation to your uncle Master Tan Jing, and ask him to go on my behalf. Remember to tell him that if there are glass Buddha statues on sale, he can ignore them. I know. The young monk nodded and said, Amitba. From today on I will meditate and comprehend Buddhist rites. I will not receive guests from now on. Master Tan Yin raised one hand and chanted the name of Buddha, saying, In the next few days, you go down the mountain and send these 2 scriptures and this prescription to the mansion of the Earl of Chang'an. Also help me send a message to the County Earl Li, saying thank you for reminding us. When the Li family has a happy event in the future, the Cold Mountain Temple will definitely send a generous gift. Not long after, the young monk walked out of the meditation room. After gently closing the door, he was about to turn around when he accidentally bumped into a little monk. I'm sorry, senior brother. The young monk looked at his monk robes stained by porridge, shook his head, took off his clothes and said, I have to go to Uncle Master Tanjing's place. Help me put these clothes in my room. Also put these 2 scriptures in my room. Okay. The little monk hurriedly answered. Fahua Temple. Glass Appreciation Conference? The middle-aged monk's face lit up and said, This is our chance. I wonder if we can see what we need. XX Temple. Go, this is His Majesty's invitation. Glass is the most precious treasure of Buddhism. I will go to the Glass Appreciation Conference in person. XX Temple. What? He didn't invite us? Why? Why are we the only ones who didn't receive invitations? No, we must protest. We are all temples. His Majesty can't treat us so differently. In 2 days, the Glass Appreciation Conference that was to be held in the palace became the hot topic of discussion in the entire capital. Not only were the dignitaries of the capital invited to this exhibition, but because the exhibition would focus on colored glaze, which was one of the 7 treasures of Buddhism, even the famous eminent monks near the capital were invited. Later, because many temples without eminent monks protested, in order to show fairness, His Majesty finally increased the number of people invited. This grand appraisal event was held in the Imperial Palace. It was said that in order to enrich the national treasury, the current emperor took out the treasures that the imperial family had hidden for decades for everyone to appraise. As long as the treasures were taken out, they could be bought and sold. The emperor would transfer all the money earned from this appraisal event to the national treasury to be used for disaster relief. The current emperor was truly a benevolent ruler. All his decrees were for the benefit of the country and the people. This time, he did not hesitate to take out the treasures of the royal family for the use of the country. Which ruler in history could be so selfless? For a moment, endless praises came from the people. Hearing that the current emperor was ill, everyone wanted to give their life to this benevolent ruler. Li didn't know whether the old emperor was selfless or not. He only knew that he was selfless to the extreme. In the entire court, in the entire capital, which official or noble could do this and donate their family's treasures to the national treasury? Do you want to go to the glass appreciation conference tonight? Standing under the tree and watching the progress of the digging of the lake, Li Xian appeared in front of Li Yi again. I'll go, Li Yi said with a sigh. Of course, he had to go see for himself what kind of dates the melons he planted would bear. Then let's go together in a while. Li Xian nodded and said, I can go see Qiner. I really didn't expect that I would have a child so soon. Tell me, what does it feel like to have a child? Li closed his eyes. He didn't want to let him taint his vision anymore. He softly spat out a word. Get lost? How strange. Li Xian muttered and walked in the direction of the classroom. When he thought that the person who would be teaching him in a moment was Li Han, he felt a bit depressed. When he walked to the door of the classroom and saw a person walking out, he was startled. He grabbed the person's arm and asked in confusion, Brother, have we met somewhere before? Chapter 628. Let go. The young man who was being pulled by Li Xian was startled at first. When he turned his head, his expression changed slightly, and he suddenly took a step back. I remember now. We really have met before. The doubt on Li Xian's face didn't last long before it turned into a sudden realization. He said with some excitement, Brother, we really have met before. Qing'an Prefecture, Jade Courtyard. Have you forgotten? I don't know you. The young man opposite him said with a cold snort. Brother, think about it again. Last time, you were taken in by that guy who likes Long Yang. Li Xian walked over with a smile and patted his chest. He said, I haven't seen you for more than a year. Brother, your body has become stronger. The young man stood there in a daze. His face turned from red to white and then to green. Get out of my way. I don't know you. Stay away from me in the future. The young man raised his head and subconsciously slapped his face. However, he withdrew his hand halfway, pushed him away, and quickly ran away. Why is everyone so strange today? Li Xian muttered. He walked into the classroom and saw Wang Dan sitting in front of him. He waved his hand and asked, Xiao Dan, do you know that person just now? Although Wang Dan didn't have to go to class with these 10 people, he was Li Han's assistant. Usually he did things like pouring tea and cleaning the blackboard. When there was no class, he would follow Li Han. Brother-in-law. Wang Dan stood up and looked outside. He lowered his head and said, I don't know him, but I know his name is Shen Shu. It seems that Prime Minister Shen used his connections to send him here. He said that his health isn't good, so he doesn't need to dig a lake. He lives alone in a small courtyard in the school and has a maid to serve him. When he said this, his tone was a little indignant. Other than the dean and deputy dean, even the teachers of the school didn't have the right to have their own small courtyard. Every time he went to Prince Jin's place, he was very envious. Compared to the dormitory that was filled with the smell of stinky feet, Prince Jin's place was like a palace in heaven. However, his grandfather was Prime Minister Shen, so it was not strange for him to have preferential treatment. If he had to lament, he could only lament that his father did not have that much face. Prime Minister Shen Li Xian muttered. Royal father and Lord Shen are very close friends. I have to ask him if there was any misunderstanding before. But I have never heard that Lord Shen has a son. Could it be that he is from the Shen family's side branch? In a remote independent courtyard of the Arithmetic Institute, the young man's face was so red that it looked like it was about to drip blood. He gritted his teeth and said bitterly, Li Xian, I won't let you off. Husband. Her Majesty the Empress has sent an invitation to invite me to attend the Glass Appreciation Conference tonight. Should I go? Li Yi helped her put up her hair and said, "Forget it, Her Majesty the Empress has banquets all day long. It's enough to go once or twice. This time, we are just going to see a pile of sand. If you like, we can have the Glass Appreciation Conference at home every day." Among the socialites in the capital, the only one Rui was familiar with was Li Xian's Crown Princess. However, for a long time to come, Crown Princess would be the first person she was forbidden to meet. Therefore, it was better for her not to go to the Imperial Palace tonight. Rui nodded and said, "Then I won't go." Li Yi helped her put on the hairpin and nodded. "Well, you are not feeling well these days. You should rest at home." Then he seemed to think of something and asked, "Can a guru also feel unwell?" Rui shook her head and said, "No matter how good one's martial arts is, he is still human. Birth, old age, illness, and death is human nature. Father died of illness that year." "What inauspicious words are you talking about?" Li Yi gently patted her head and said, "I will go to the Imperial Palace early today to find the Imperial Physician and ask him to come tomorrow." Rui shook her head and said, "No need, it's women's business. It will be better in a few days. If it is still like this, I will listen to my husband." Li Yi originally planned to go to the Imperial Palace later, but if it was too late, the Imperial Physician's Bureau would be off work. After lunch, he asked Feng to prepare the carriage. An official of the Imperial Physician's Bureau cupped his hands and said, "Lord Lu was asked by the Ministry of Justice to investigate a case. He is not in the Imperial Physician's Bureau these days. When Lord Lu comes back, please tell him to come to the Li Mansion in a few days." In the entire Imperial Physician's Bureau, Lu Jimin's medical skills were the most reliable to Li Yi, so he was not in a hurry to come. "Lord Li, don't worry, I will tell Lord Lu this." The official of the Imperial Physician's Bureau knew the relationship between Lord Lu and Uncle Li, and the latter was also very famous in the Imperial Physician's Bureau, so he bowed and said. The Glaze Appraisal Conference was held in Chongyuan Palace, which was the largest palace in the Imperial Palace. It was usually used for big celebrations. This time, not only the officials and nobles were invited, but also dozens of monks. Except for Chongyuan Palace, the other palaces could not be used as it would affect the old emperor's ability to extort money. It was because of this reason that he made an exception and opened Chongyuan Palace. It was still early in the evening, and there was not enough time to go back. Li Yi showed his token at the gate of the Imperial Palace and walked into the Imperial Palace leisurely. After passing through the Morning Dew Palace, he saw a figure in a wide square behind him, and a sword was dancing. He casually sat down on the steps, wondering who was more powerful, the princess or Mississippi Lu. A sword shadow flashed in front of him and stopped 3 inches away from him. Emingzi sheathed her sword and sat next to him. She asked, "You will offend all the nobles in the capital." Li Yi had a thoughtful look on his face. He looked back at her and asked, "Between you and my second miss, who is more powerful?" Emingzi was startled. She said, "We fought but there was no winner." Li Yi nodded and said, "The one who held the Glaze Appraisal Conference was His Majesty, and the one who sold the glaze was the Wang family. I just gave you a glaze statue. Father said that in a few days, you will use glaze to make tiles? Don't you think glaze tiles are very beautiful? The Wang family can help you for a while, but not forever. At that time, even the most stupid person will understand that this matter has something to do with you. And then, if you offend all the nobles in the capital, you will no longer have a foothold in the capital, and father will not be able to protect you. At that time, who cares?" Emingzi turned her head and looked at him. After a moment of silence, she suddenly said, "I want to eat egg fried rice." Her Highness wanted to eat egg fried rice, so the officials of the catering bureau began to panic. In another 2 hours, the Glaze Appraisal Conference would officially begin. They were about to make some pastries and vegetarian food for the guests, but the kitchen was occupied by the princess and Uncle Li. Both of them were frequent customers of the catering bureau, especially the latter, who was a nightmare for the catering bureau manager. Fortunately, they only occupied the kitchen for 15 minutes. After leaving the kitchen in a mess, they left in a carefree manner. The tiger's eyes were filled with tears, and his voice sounded like he was about to cry. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and clean up. Morning Dew Hall. 2 plates of egg fried rice and a few side dishes were the two's supper. No wine. Emingzu frowned. Make do. Li shook his head. Do you remember the first time we met? Yes, Arrestor Li. Manager Li, County Lieutenant Li, County Son Li, County Uncle Li. In a few days you will be County Marquis Li. In less than 2 years, you are the first since the founding of the country. From Arrestor Li to Princess Royal, you used even less time. Have you really made up your mind? Don't forget your original intention. Only then will you succeed. What's your original intention? Original intention? Li raised his head, smiled and did not speak. Strange, won't he come tonight? Outside Chongyuan Hall, Li Xian looked around and searched the crowd twice, and murmured with some doubts. The Chongyuan Hall hadn't opened yet, but there were already many people gathered outside the hall. He had gone to look for Li Yi just now, but he found out that Li Yi had entered the palace 4 hours ago. However, he couldn't find Li Yi even after looking inside and outside the palace. Several women walked past him. Li Xian was stunned for a moment, and turned his head, stared at one of the women, and said in surprise, Miss, have we met before? Chapter 629. Oofed. Before the woman could open her mouth, the other women beside her laughed. Have we met somewhere before? This sentence was not unfamiliar to them. Usually, those men who boasted of themselves as talented had already used this kind of trick. Su, this young master is asking you a question. A woman pulled the woman's sleeve and teasingly asked. The woman called Su clenched her teeth and said, I have never seen him before. Let's go. Li Xian's face revealed a puzzled expression. This woman looked very familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen her before. Suddenly, an idea flashed in his mind and he suddenly said, Do you have a brother called Shin Shu? A woman next to her asked. Su, do you have a brother called Shin Shu in your family? No, this person might be sick. Let's go. The woman called Su glared at Li Xian and strode away. That's the crown prince we are talking about. Among the younger generation in the capital, only County Uncle Li is more outstanding than him. Su, you have to be careful with your words. It won't be good if someone hears you. A woman behind her looked back and reminded her. What 3 heroes of the capital? It's just a shameless pervert. Su's face revealed an embarrassed and angry expression. She lowered her voice and said in a low voice. But the second half of the sentence was very low. No one could hear it except for her. Outside the hall, Li Xian shook his head. He saw that the Chongyuan Hall had opened and the crowd began to pour in. He doubtfully said, Is he really not coming today? The Chongyuan Hall was a place where large-scale celebrations were held. The space inside the hall was extremely spacious. The crowd walked in from the outside and saw that the hall was brightly lit. There were tables that extended from the entrance to the innermost part of the hall. There were several palace guards guarding around each table. Ah, there's another glazed statue of Goddess of Mercy here. It's even bigger than the one in the Cold Mountain Temple. An official couldn't help but exclaim in surprise when he saw the glazed statue of Goddess of Mercy as soon as he entered the hall. Behind him, a few famous monks in the capital revealed a strange look in their eyes. Look at this ruibing. Oh my god, it's crystal clear and doesn't contain any impurities. Glass bowls, glass cups, glass chopsticks, all of them are made of glass. Only the royal family has this kind of heritage. There's more ahead, there's more ahead. I see another Buddha statue. Originally, the crowd did not have much expectations for today's glaze appraisal convention. Who would have thought that the imperial palace would have so many glaze wares? Colored glaze was an auspicious sign, a treasure. Who didn't want to have a few pieces in their home? It would bring some luck to the family, bring more good fortune, and allow the entire family to continue on for a longer time. Although they didn't know if it was accurate, it was better to believe it than not. What if it came true? Moreover, this was a colored glaze from the royal family's collection. They might even be able to get a share of the royal family's luck. No matter what, they had to buy one today. At a glance, there were only a few dozen pieces of colored glaze. It was far from enough for so many people to share. Moreover, there were so many monks competing with them. It would not be easy to get one piece. Looking at the monks looking at the glazed Buddha statue, their eyes were shining brighter than their bald heads. They knew that there would be a tough battle today. Master, you must get this glazed hairpin later. A middle-aged woman turned to look at the man beside her and said. The man frowned and said, Nonsense. This hairpin probably costs nearly 1,000 taels of silver. Where would we have the money for you to squander? The woman's expression was gloomy. She sighed and said, I've been married to the Ma family for so many years. Have I ever asked for anything from you? The man's face showed that he was in a difficult position. On the other side, a young woman said in a sad voice, Husband, this glazed bracelet reminds me of my deceased mother. Husband, can you help me buy it? Somewhere, a woman held the arm of the person beside her and pointed to an item in a brocade box on the table. She murmured, Husband, this is the bracelet that often appears in my dreams. Glazed wooden fish, glazed Buddhist beads, glazed Buddha statue, glazed incense burner. Even though many of the monks present were highly praised by the people, when faced with these things, they could not help but show expressions of absent-mindedness or shock. They even had an illusion that this glaze appreciation conference was prepared for them. Your Majesty, since when did the palace have so many glaze? Imperial concubine Cui asked Emperor Jing in confusion. There was an area at the front that was separated by a curtain. I discovered it a few days ago when I was investigating the secret treasures of the royal family. They should be treasures that were offered by the people over the past few decades. These things are useless. Since I took them from the people, I will use them for the people. Your Majesty is benevolent. Imperial concubine Chui's voice paused for a moment before she continued. Can I take the smaller Buddha statue with me? Colored glaze is a Buddhist treasure. I will pray for your Majesty sooner or later. Perhaps it will be more efficacious. Emperor Jing nodded and said, Permission granted. A eunuch stood at the front and said, Everyone, His Majesty has decreed that these glaze wares are allowed to be sold today. You can bid at will. The highest bidder wins. The silver earned from the sale will all go to the national treasury. The base price of each item is written on the box. Everyone can start bidding now. Many people in the hall were waiting for this moment. Some of them could not wait to look at it. 3,000 taels. This glaze rui actually costs 3,000 taels. A glaze hairpin worth 1,000 taels. That's 10 times more than the golden jade pavilion. 3,000 taels of glazed Buddhist beads, 2,000 taels of wooden fish, 2,000 taels of incense burner, and 10,000 taels of Buddha statue. Even though they knew that glaze was rare and the price should not be cheap, after confirming it, some people still gasped. Some of the officials present had just lost a lot of money a few days ago. How could they afford to buy these things? Even if they could afford it, would they dare to buy it? Wasn't it obvious to His Majesty that they had been greedy before? As for the officials who did not lose money a few days ago, they did not dare to act rashly. How much salary did the two prime ministers have in a year? They were only 5th and 4th rank officials. What was the difference between taking out a few thousand taels to buy glaze and directly telling His Majesty that they had been corrupted and bribed? Of course, the courtiers did not have money or courage, but it did not mean that the nobles did not. Their foundation was much deeper than that of the officials. Someone walked to a table and said, 3,000 taels. If no one bids, I will buy this Bingyu Rui. What a joke. You want to buy it with only 3,000 taels? I will pay 3,050 taels. Another person came out and said with a sneer. 4,000 taels. 4,050 taels. The man said with a smile. 50 taels is not enough to go to Drunken Moon restaurant for a meal. No matter how much you pay, I will pay 50 taels more than you. The man who first spoke paused for a moment. 4,051 taels. Our Fahua temple must get this Buddha statue. Even if it costs 20,000 taels, we must get it. There are only a dozen Buddha statues. We must get at least one. We cannot lose to them. The number of Buddha statues is limited. I am afraid we cannot compete with them. We must get this string of prayer beads. I bid 4,300 taels. 4,001. 4,002. When Li Yi walked out of the hall, he saw a few imperial guards dragging two people out. He glanced at them and turned to Emingzu and said, "Look at you. You insisted on eating some egg fried rice. Aren't you late?" Chapter 630. Your Majesty, won't you go out and take a look? In the Chongyuan Hall, the Empress walked over holding the hand of the Crown Prince's consort, and asked with a smile. Emperor Jing shook his head and said, "If we go out, they won't be able to relax. Let's wait until all the glazed items are sold." Changde came in from outside and bowed. Your Majesty, the largest glazed Buddha statue has been bought by the Fahua Temple for 30,000 taels of silver. 30,000 taels of silver. A sneer appeared on Emperor Jing's face and he said, "We have to carefully consider allocating 30,000 taels of silver to the Ministry of War. These monks are really generous. Let's go out. It's quite noisy here." The Empress took the hand of the Crown Prince's consort and said with a smile, "Which glazed jewelry do you like? Tell the Empress and she will ask them to bring it over." "No need, Empress, I want to see my husband." The Empress patted her hand and said, "Okay, after the appraisal is over, I will send someone to call him over." Outside the curtain, an imperial guard said to the monks who came over, "Masters, I'm sorry, but this glazed Buddha statue is wanted by the imperial consort. It is not for sale today." What? The expressions of two monks immediately changed. For them, these glazed Buddha statues were the most important things in the hall today. Fortunately, the Buddha statues were huge and expensive. Ordinary nobles could not afford them, and very few people would compete with them. However, these Buddha statues were still too few. Dozens of temples were competing for the 10 glazed statues. Originally, there were more monks than Buddha statues. Several large temples had already distributed the statues, but this imperial concubine suddenly wanted one statue. Someone had to return empty-handed. Who would be willing to be the monk who returned empty-handed? Ba. One of the masters spat out a Buddhist name and said, "If that's the case." The monks were relieved. As long as someone withdrew, their Buddha statues would be saved. The old monk had a solemn expression and said, "If that's the case, the Wanhua Temple will increase the price of the Mahamayuri statue by 5,000 taels of silver." A monk's expression changed immediately and said, "I'm afraid this is inappropriate. Didn't we agree that this Mahamayuri statue belongs to our 1,000 Buddha temple?" The old monk shook his head and said, "Ba. His Majesty has said that the highest bidder wins. My actions are not inappropriate." The monk gritted his teeth and said, "My 1,000 Buddha temple will add another 5,000 taels." The crowd in the hall was distinct. Around the few booths, there were only bare heads. On these booths were, of course, Buddha statues and prayer beads. As for the glass jewelry, most of them were women. Of course, there were also many men beside them. Usually, it was His Majesty and Empress who would hold separate banquets. Today's glass appreciation conference was one of the few occasions where men and women were not separated. "Miaoyu, do you have any jewelry you like? Second brother will buy it for you." Chen Chong stood beside the white-haired woman and asked with a smile. The woman shook her head and said, "It's good that you can wear the jewelry. How much can you do with 3,000 taels of silver? Forget it." Chen Chong waved his hand and said, "You don't have to worry about that. Just tell second brother which one he likes." The white-haired woman smiled and said, "There's nothing I like. Let's go over there and take a look." Chen Chong nodded. After the white-haired woman turned around, he waved his hand at the person beside him and said, "Miaoyu has been looking at this hairpin for a long time. Buy it." Chen Qing waved his hand and said, "I know. Go and accompany her." 3,000 taels of silver. 3,500 taels of silver. A young man standing beside the booth said helplessly as he glanced at the woman beside him. Hearing the voice beside him, he was stunned for a moment. When he turned around, his expression changed and he immediately said, "Sorry, I misspoke. We don't want this hairpin anymore." The eunuch looked around and saw that many of the people who had been eager to try had retreated. He said helplessly, 3,000 taels going once, 3,000 taels going twice, 3,000 taels going thrice. Congratulations, official Chun. You can take this hairpin. Remember to send the money to the palace within 3 days. Susu, do you intend to buy one back? A woman called Chun Su asked in a low voice as she stood beside one of the booths. No. She shook her head. It was easy to buy it, but it would be troublesome to explain it to her grandfather and father. That's true. It's too expensive. Let's just take a look. The woman beside her glanced around and pointed to a place not far away and said, that Buddha statue over there is so beautiful. Let's go take a look. Miaoyu, this Buddha statue looks not bad. Do you want me to buy it for you and place it in the temple at home? The white-haired woman turned around and looked at the middle-aged man. She said helplessly, no need, second brother. This Buddha statue costs 20,000 taels of silver. Worshipping Buddha requires sincerity. There's no need to be so extravagant. Chun Chong waved his hand and said, it's precisely because I'm sincere that I want to buy it. He walked over and said, this Buddha statue is for Duke Chen's residence. The imperial guard had a helpless expression and said, official Chen, this Buddha statue is for the imperial concubine. The imperial concubine? Chun Chong frowned. If it was someone else, he could still fight for it. However, if it was the imperial concubine, it would be difficult. The imperial guard pointed to the side and said, official Chun, there's another one over there. Do you want to go take a look? The monks who were bidding looked over at the same time, causing the imperial guard to shiver uncontrollably. The white-haired woman walked over to take a look at the Buddha statue. Behind her, a young woman also came over. What a beautiful Buddha statue, the woman praised softly. Just as she was about to go forward, a huge force suddenly came from behind her, causing her body to fall forward involuntarily. Her entire body crashed into the white-haired woman. The latter crashed directly into the display stand and fell to the ground. Pa! It happened suddenly. A crisp sound rang out in the hall. The surrounding imperial guards looked down, and their faces instantly paled. Susu, a figure beside her, immediately helped the woman up. Miaoyu, are you alright? Chun Chong looked back and immediately rushed over, asking anxiously. Seeing blood seeping out from the white-haired woman's palm, his expression changed. He immediately said, Imperial physician, hurry and summon the imperial physician. It's broken. An imperial guard looked at the shattered Buddha statue on the ground. His face was pale and bloodless as he spoke in a trembling voice. A glass statue worth 20,000 taels of silver had been shattered, and it was even one personally appointed by the imperial consort. As imperial guards in charge of guarding it, who could bear this responsibility? The woman called Susu's face also paled. She hurriedly went to the white-haired woman's side and said, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. Are you alright? Imperial physician, where's the imperial physician? Chun Chong pushed the woman away. His eyes were bloodshot as he roared. A figure walked out from the crowd. He squatted down and picked up the white-haired woman's hand to take a look. He said, it's just a light cut. It's not a big deal. Li Yi turned back to look at Emingzu and asked, do you have a clean handkerchief? I do. The woman called Susu immediately took out a handkerchief from her bosom. Li Yi picked out a few extremely small pieces of glass and bandaged it for her. He said, in a while the imperial physician will come. After he cleans the wound, use a clean gauze to bandage it again. Remember not to touch water for the next few days. Chun Chong glanced at Li Yi. His expression turned cold, but he didn't say anything. He stood up, looked at the woman and asked, what were you doing just now? The woman called Susu's face paled. She was shaken by his aura and couldn't speak. Lord Chun is a dignified imperial censor. Why would you bully a weak woman? Li Xian raised his eyebrows. Since this woman was very likely Shen Shu's younger sister and a member of the Shen clan, he naturally couldn't remain silent. Chapter 631. Imperial consort Cui could not be offended by the Qin family. Ningguang was far away in Qing'an Prefecture. He looked like an idle prince, but in reality, he could not be offended. Chen Chong glanced at Li Xian and did not speak. The glass statue was broken because of that woman. Countless people saw it with their own eyes. Whether it was His Majesty or Imperial Consort Shui, they would not easily let this matter go. He turned to look at the white-haired woman and asked with concern, "Miao Yu, are you okay?" "I'm fine." The white-haired woman's face was a little pale as she shook her head. At this time, countless people had gathered around. This is the Medicine Buddha statue just now? Ba, Medicine Buddha, please don't blame. Sinful. There was a group of monks standing by just now. At this time, looking at the fragments on the ground, their faces were full of sorrow and regret. That Buddha statue was Medicine Buddha, also known as Medicine Buddha. Medicine Buddha was the leader of the Eastern world of clear glass. However, at this time, it had turned into glass fragments on the ground. Oh my God, did that Buddha statue just break? This is 20,000 taels of silver. Who broke it? Just now, they said that it was Imperial Consort Shui who wanted it. This is terrible. It seems to be third young miss of the Chen family. I just saw it. More and more people gathered around. When they saw the situation on the ground, they were all shocked. Their eyes looked at the woman called Su Su, and third young miss of the Chen family. Not far away, there was finally some movement from within the tent. Imperial Consort Shui accompanied Emperor Jing and walked over from afar. Everyone hurriedly bowed and greeted. "Your Majesty, Imperial Consort Shui." "No need to be so polite." Emperor Jing waved his hand. Before he could speak, Imperial Consort Shui had already seen the fragments on the ground. Her face instantly darkened. She said coldly, "Who broke the glass statue that I wanted?" Countless people sighed in their hearts. Imperial Consort Shui was really unlucky these days. A few days ago, someone had broken a precious jade bracelet. Today, the Buddha statue that she wanted worth 20,000 taels of silver was broken. If shattering could lead to peace, then Imperial Consort Shui would probably be safe for a long time. This subordinate deserves to die. The Imperial guards who were guarding this booth knelt down in unison, their faces pale and bloodless. Imperial concubine Shui looked coldly at the guards and asked again, "Who broke my glass statue?" Jingdi looked at Li Yi strangely. If it was half a month ago, he might be furious when the glazed Buddha statue worth 20,000 taels of silver was broken. He would investigate the matter thoroughly and punish those who should be punished and compensate those who should be compensated. But now he knew that this thing was not worth much at all, so he naturally did not feel much. Of course, he still felt his heart ache. After all, according to Changda, up until now, the National Treasury had already received 300,000 taels of silver. After today's stained glass appraisal conference, there would probably be at least 500,000 taels of silver. Unfortunately, today's profits were split 50-50, and he would only get half of it. The old emperor's gaze made Li Yi very unhappy. It was as if he was the one who broke the glass. Only an idiot would do such a thing. After all, among the 20,000 taels of silver, there was 10,000 taels of silver. Just this 10,000 taels of silver, and the old emperor was stingy enough to collect taxes. The imperial guard raised his head and said in a trembling voice, replying to Imperial Consort Shui, "This Buddha statue was accidentally broken by third young Miss Chen." "A bunch of nonsense." Chen Chong's face darkened. He pointed at the young woman and said angrily, "If she did not bump into her from behind, would third young Miss have fallen?" A middle-aged man walked out from behind the young woman and said calmly, "Do you mean that my daughter deliberately framed third young Miss?" When they saw the middle-aged man, many people were stunned. The man who stood out was surnamed Shen. He was the rentier of the Secretariat and was responsible for drafting the most important edict. He was also responsible for the secretarial work of the Prime Minister's Council. Drafting edicts was a matter of great importance. It was equivalent to directly participating in the political and military affairs of the country. Thus, the position of rentier of the Secretariat was extremely important. Those who held this position were all learned scholars. Of course, none of this was important compared to his identity. Other than this identity, he was also the eldest son of Prime Minister Shen. In other words, that young woman was the legitimate daughter of the Shen family? This matter was also related to imperial consort Cui. Although the Chun family and the Cui family had some friction recently, the root cause was still the King of Shu's faction. Prime Minister Shen had never publicly supported any of the princes, and had even rejected the King of Shu's recruitment many times. Duke Chen's household and Prime Minister Shen's household. There was going to be a big show to watch today. That is not what he meant. Chun Qing walked over and said, "Everything should wait for your majesty to investigate before making a decision." Capital Governor Dong Wenyun also walked out from the crowd and said, "Official Chen is right. Please make a decision, your majesty." The former magistrate of Qing and Prefecture, Capital Governor Dong Wenyun, had married the eldest daughter of the previous generation of the Shen family. It was not surprising for him to stand out and speak at this time. What exactly happened? How did this Buddha statue break? Emperor Jing looked at Dong Wenyun and said, "Wenyun, I will leave this matter to you to investigate." Your Majesty, your Majesty." Dong Wenyun bowed slightly and turned back to look at the young woman. He asked, Su, tell me, what exactly happened just now?" The young woman said with a pale face, "Uncle, I am also not too sure. When I was walking over just now, it seemed like someone pushed me from behind. Then I bumped into her, and the glass statue broke." "Then who was behind you just now?" Dong Wenyun raised his eyebrows and asked again. "I do not know." The young woman shook her head and said. A woman beside her said, Su, I saw it. Just now, there was only a master walking past you, but he did not touch you." "Master?" Dong Wenyun frowned and asked, "Which master?" "This one." Emingzu walked over from behind. With a wave of her hand, a human-shaped object was thrown over. She nodded at Li Yi and looked at the motionless monk on the ground. She asked, "This master, the appreciation meeting is not over yet. Why are you in a hurry to leave?" "Emingzu this is?" Emperor Jing looked at her and asked in confusion. Emingzu replied, "Father, when I came in just now, I happened to see this master sweep Miss Shen with his sleeve." Sweeping someone and pushing them out? A man beside her had a look of disbelief. Emingzu casually waved her sleeve and lightly brushed the man's shoulder. He couldn't help but take a few steps back with a horrified expression on his face. Seeing this scene, many people immediately thought of the scene where the princess and the people of the Qi kingdom had a duel and discreetly distanced themselves from her. "Ba." The monk chanted the name of Buddha and said, "Your Highness's martial arts are excellent. I am ashamed of my inferiority. However, I do not know martial arts and do not have the strength of your Highness. I also do not have the ability to push this lady out with a wave of my sleeve." Bang! Suddenly, the monk's expression changed, and he suddenly swung his kasaya to shatter a glass statue that was smashing towards his head. The fragments flew in all directions, and it was an extremely gorgeous scene that instantly caused countless people to stare blankly at it. It happened very suddenly. From the moment a glass statue smashed the monk's head to the moment the monk attacked, it only took a moment. It was so fast that no one could react. The hall was strangely quiet. At this moment Li Yi clapped his hands and looked at the monk. He said apologetically, "Sorry, my hand accidentally slipped. Master, what did you want to say just now? Please continue." Chapter 632. The hall continued to be quiet. The monk raised his head to look at Li Yi, sighed softly, and slowly lowered his head. Some of the more timid women had turned pale with fright when they saw that scene. That glass statue was more than a foot tall. Moreover, it had been smashed with such force. So, if it had fallen on the monk's head, then it would have been a bloodbath in the Chongyuan Palace. Then they thought of something. Just now, the monk clearly said that he didn't know martial arts, but if he didn't know martial arts, how could he smash the glass statue with just his sleeves? The scene just now surprised them even more than Princess Royal Xiaolu's move. However, how did County Uncle Li know that the monk knew martial arts? If he really didn't know, wouldn't he have smashed someone to death just now? Moreover, what he had just smashed was another glass statue. Ba. Several monks who had already bought the glass statue looked at the debris on the ground and sighed. Their faces showed that they had nothing left to live for. The corner of Jingdi's mouth twitched, and his face showed a painful expression. This was another glass statue. After being smashed like that, at least 20,000 taels of silver disappeared. Chen Chong was stunned for a moment. He pointed at the monk on the ground and said angrily, "Old monk, you still say that you don't know martial arts? Take him." Jingdi waved his hand, and immediately 2 imperial guards came forward to seize the monk. Imperial concubine Chui's face turned cold. She looked at Li Yi and asked, "Who told you to smash that glass statue?" Only then did everyone react. The old monk's lie had been exposed, but wasn't the price he had to pay a little too high? A glass statue. If they remembered correctly, this glass statue was sold for nearly 30,000 taels of silver. In other words, with County Uncle Li smashing it, 30,000 taels of silver was gone. Even if the glass statue had nothing to do with them, they couldn't help but feel distressed at this moment. Before Li Yi could speak, the capital governor, Dong Wenyuan, came out and said, "Your Majesty, in order to expose this monk's lie, County Uncle Li was anxious and smashed this glass statue. It's understandable. County Uncle Li's quick wit, this Shen admires." The man surnamed Shen said, "What Lord Dong said makes sense. County Uncle Li was just anxious. At the end of the day, the responsibility lies with the monk." If Dong Wenyuan and Shen Xiu had stepped forward because County Uncle Li had helped Shen Su out of trouble, then Chen Qing's words had surprised everyone. Chen Qing, who represented the Chen clan, was actually publicly opposing the imperial consort? "Your Majesty, in my opinion, this monk is the culprit. These 2 Buddha statues should be put on his head." Another person walked out from the crowd and said with a smile. Seeing that even the head of the Wang family stood out, many people were shocked. Old General Shui's rough voice was heard after a while. "Your Majesty, it's better to ask this old monk what he's up to before punishing him for his crimes. It won't be too late to ask for compensation." Just as old General Shui finished his sentence, the Minister of War, Yan Bing, stepped forward. Minister of Revenue Qin Huan. Minister of Justice. Chancellor of the Supreme Court. Another veteran general. Imperial Consort Chui's expression was frighteningly gloomy. The officials who were on the King of Shu's side had their mouths wide open in shock. It was not surprising that the Shen family had stepped forward. It was also not surprising that the Minister of War, Yan Bing, had spoken up for him. The family of generals had been trying to protect him for a long time. But the Wang family of Luochuan, the Minister of Revenue and the officials related to them, since when did they have such a close relationship with him? Everyone knew that County Uncle Li Yi of Chang and was not on good terms with the King of Shu. His relationship with the officials on the king's side was like fire and water. Everyone thought that he was relying on His Majesty's favor to maintain his current situation. The day he lost the favor, he would be doomed. But who would have thought that his influence in the imperial court would be so great? Didn't that mean that if he supported one of the princes, all the advantages that the King of Shu had would disappear with the support of these people behind him? His advantage would immediately become a disadvantage. For a moment, the old monk was ignored by everyone. Li was also a little surprised. What was the Chen family doing? And the Minister of Revenue, Qin Huan, had specially asked him to train a few talents that the Ministry of Revenue could use. Was he returning the favor this time? Li Xian had said that the Chancellor of the Supreme Court was one of his people. What was going on with the others? He was not familiar with them at all. Oh yes, among the people who had sent gifts to his family a few days ago, there seemed to be some familiar faces. The surrounding people were still whispering. Emperor Jing looked to his side. Changde nodded and stepped forward to ask, "Tell me, why did you do this?" The monk's expression was calm and he was silent. Why isn't the monk talking? It's tens of thousands of taels of silver. Can he afford it? I'm also curious. Does this monk have a grudge against the Chen family? While the crowd was whispering, Li Yi suddenly said, "Your Majesty, I seem to have seen this master and the princess say a few words." The first half of his sentence was very light, but he emphasized the word princess. What? Emperor Jing did not hear Li Yi's words clearly. He asked in confusion. What did you just say? Ba. The old monk finally said. I don't know Princess Hui at all. I'm afraid you've made a mistake. Changde glanced at Li Yi. Even with his great hearing, he did not hear what Li Yi had just said about the princess. He looked at him and asked, Did you just say that the monk talked to Princess Hui? No. Li Yi shook his head and said, I thought about it. I seem to have made a mistake just now. What did Supervisor Chang say about Princess Hui? The old monk looked up at him with an unbelievable expression in his eyes. Finally he lowered his head. County Magistrate Li, you're wise. I have nothing to say. After saying this, the old monk said no more. After a short period of silence, the crowd made way for them. Princess Hui stood at the end of the road with a pale face. Empress, I'll leave this matter to you. Emperor Jing said lightly, glanced at Li Yi and said, Come with me. Watching Emperor Jing walk to the back hall, Li Yi shook his head and followed. This time, the Chun family does not owe you. When he walked past Chun Chong, he glanced at Li Yi and said in a low voice. Li Yi turned to look at third Miss Chun and said, Remember to ask the imperial physician to treat the wound again. Don't touch water these days. Watching his back disappear, several officials in the crowd gathered together with a slightly gloomy face. I didn't expect that he would have such an influence in the court. If we let him continue to develop, there will be trouble in the future. Humph, it would be fine if he didn't have today. Making friends has violated His Majesty's taboo. Do you think he can continue to be favored by the emperor? A person showed a sneer on his face. The rest of the people were stunned for a moment, and then a smile appeared on their faces. In the back hall, Emperor Jing sat on the main seat and looked at Li Yi with a painful expression. He said, With this fall, the 20,000 taels of silver in the national treasury will be gone. Your Majesty, it's 10,000 taels. Li Yi reminded him. Did you forget that there is still half of it? Emperor Jing's face twitched and he changed the topic. How did you know that the old monk knew martial arts? I didn't know. Emperor Jing was slightly stunned and asked, Then you dared to smash it? Li Yi looked at him and said, Didn't your subject's hand slip? Besides, your subject has already apologized. One last question. Emperor Jing took a deep breath and asked, How did you know it was Princess Hui? Imperial concubine Chui was too scheming and would not do such a thing. To be able to set up such an idiotic trap on such an occasion, her intelligence must be very low. Princess Hui obviously agreed with this condition. And it was not the first time she had done such a thing. Chun Chong had broken Royal Prince Duanyang's ribs, so she had a motive for revenge. Of course, when he and the eldest princess came in, that Princess Hui actually looked at him coldly, which made him very uncomfortable. This was also one of the important reasons. In short, Li Yi thought for a moment, looked at Emperor Jing and said, I guessed that you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.